Homeless, Hatori was auctioned off as an item. Wait, this sounds like a classic old-school romance novel opening. I've heard it's cliché. Let's see for ourselves. Exciting. Chained, Hatori was taken to the auction site where, besides humans and goods, there were non-human beings as well. The auction attendees, including a cloaked figure who quietly put away his staff, had also arrived. Unconcerned about who would purchase her, Hatori just wanted a place to belong. As the auction's most valuable item, the bidding escalated until a cloaked sorcerer appeared, causing a stir. Known as the strongest sorcerer in the magical world and rarely seen, he made a high bid for Hatori, intending to make her his apprentice. The sorcerer won Hatori for £5 million. The auctioneer reminded him of the rules, but the sorcerer ignored him, grabbed Hatori by the collar, and told her to stand tall and look forward without bowing. He then used the lounge area. The auctioneer wondered aloud if the sorcerer was a monster, noting his skull-like appearance. Another cautioned him to be careful, as the sorcerer could hear everything. Indeed, the sorcerer was a genuine, though rare, practitioner of his craft. Leaving the basement with Hatori, the sorcerer asked if she could see floating creatures. Someone remarked that Hatori was the knight's beloved child, capable of seeing things others couldn't, which made her feared as a monster. Revealing his name as Iriasu, the sorcerer acknowledged Hatori's unique sight as fortunate, though it had caused her to be ostracized and not sent to an orphanage due to shame, while others deemed her unlucky and called her a freak. Hatori felt she had no luck at all, but Iriasu promised to make her feel fortunate. Embracing her, he conjured thorns, and when Hatori opened her eyes, they were in front of a wooden cabin in a forest. Iriasu declared it his home, and now hers too. They were in a village on the western border of London, England. Iriasu destroyed her collar, declaring her his apprentice from that day. Sorcery was real, but nearly extinct and outdated. He was pleased to have Hatori as his apprentice. Like a kitten, Hatori was taken by Iriasu to freshen up, without a chance to refuse, fully exposed and sensitive during her adolescence. Yet, unexpectedly, she enjoyed a good bath, having previously contemplated suicide, dissuaded only by the auctioneer. While bathing, Hatori saw a fairy appear. The fairies shared how humans refer to them, but expressed a hope that Hatori would call them friendly neighbors. They were also surprised that the sorcerer, Iriasu, had chosen the knight's beloved child as his apprentice. It seems Hatori's nature is unusual and popular among the fairy and sprite races. They promised to help her fully if she decided to become a sorcerer, considering her the darling of the night. Iriasu called Hatori to come eat. There was a beautiful blonde Gothic maid at home. Hearing that Hatori had seen a fairy, Iriasu mentioned that it was Ariel. He demonstrated his magic by summoning a firebird and remarked on his good fortune in finding the knight's beloved child as an apprentice. Hatori was curious about what exactly the knight's beloved child was. Iriasu explained it as similar to a queen bee, attracting and capturing various beings like fairies or creatures, regardless of whether they could see the queen bee. Being able to see fairies made Hatori a rarity among the knight's beloved children. These beings bring both misfortune and fortune to her, as their closeness is not entirely friendly to humans, but having their favor naturally makes using magic easy. Thus, Hatori could definitely become an excellent sorcerer. Iriasu would not make arbitrary demands on Hatori, but emphasized that she was already part of his family, and it was okay for her to be a bit spoiled occasionally. He also gave her a natural magic stone matching the color of her eyes for protection. The maid, Silky, took Hatori back to her room to rest. Hatori was surprised by the soft bed and fell asleep smelling the scent of grass. She was awakened by a knock on the window, finding Ariel, whom she had met earlier, wanting to take her for a walk in the forest. Feeling its goodwill, Hatori went along for the walk. Iriasu saw this and silently put on his cloak, considering it a lesson for Hatori. Ariel led Hatori deep into the forest, expressing fondness and closeness in his words. When Hatori realized they were too far and decided to return, Ariel argued that she had no family or anyone waiting for her, suggesting she live in the fairy realm for a happier life. Surprisingly, Hatori pinched her hand until it bled. While she once had no one who needed her, Iriasu had offered her a place to stay, saying even if she were discarded after being used as a toy, she wouldn't regret it. Ieyasu had called her family, which made her very happy. Unexpectedly, Ieyasu appeared beside her, remarking that his good apprentice remembered where her home was. Ariel was angry, wondering how Ieyasu found them. It turned out the magic stone Ieyasu gave Hatori also functioned as a bell for location tracking. Ieyasu decided to let them go this time, but warned of consequences for next time. Ariel felt he failed to protect the knight's beloved child. Hatori thought she would be scolded, but Ieyasu simply patted her head and explained that most fairies use sweet words to lure others, advising her to be cautious. He admitted his own responsibility for not informing her earlier and expressed a wish for Hatori to rely on him more. However, Hatori noticed Ieyasu's body was stiff, and the next second, he lifted her to treat a wound on her leg, joking that he couldn't let his future wife have a scar. Confused about who the wife was, Ieyasu revealed he bought Hatori as an apprentice but planned to marry her when she grew up, jesting about the traditional practice of raising a child bride, which he acknowledged as problematic. After her mother suicided, saying birthing her was a mistake, Hatori didn't care who bought her at the auction as long as it didn't hurt. The auctioneer called her a treasure and noticed her despair. Waking up to see her hand bandaged, Silky, holding clothes, came in and helped her dress before taking her to Ieyasu and quickly starting breakfast. Ieyasu mentioned that Silky was a fairy who permanently lived in the house, responsible for cooking, laundry, and cleaning. The clothes Hatori wore were also prepared by Silky, making her seem more like the house's master rather than a maid. Ieyasu's letter turned into a paper bird and flew away, which he said was for a friend. Hatori still remembers that he wanted to take her as his apprentice and marry her. She isn't sure which was his original intention. She found out she had been asleep for 2 days, probably because she was very tired before. She doesn't know much about Ieyasu's character or appearance, but thinks he must not be a bad person since he takes care of her. Just after she started eating, Ieyasu suggested preparing for a honeymoon trip since she was awake. Hatori was stunned by his strange way of speaking, but soon found herself taken to the train station. They went shopping, and Ieyasu introduced her to a friend. Hatori thought about Ieyasu's skull face, unsure how much was serious and how much was a joke. Then he changed his face to a human one, saying he couldn't go out with a skull face. He even changed his touch and temperature, which Hatori commented on as feeling fake, leaving Ieyasu a bit offended. He took her to a magic bookstore where they met Angelica. Angelica was surprised that Hatori was Ieyasu's apprentice and worried that Hatori might have been abducted through some dubious means. She even asked Hatori if anything strange had happened to her. Caught in thought, Hatori asked if being stripped and proposed to count it as strange. Angelica, smiling, turned around and punched Ieyasu, scolding him for being a perverse sorcerer and lacking common sense. She was, however, surprised that Ieyasu truly intended to take an apprentice and propose marriage. Inside the house, there were many small fairies. Angelica revealed she was also a sorcerer on the brink of extinction and a member of the Sorcerers' Technical Research Association. She usually made magical tools that use magic instead of electricity as a power source. She also had a daughter with some magical talent, but didn't want her daughter to end up like her, struggling to make money. Angelica also explained the difference between magic and illusion. Illusionists manipulate what is known as the science of magic, while sorcerers use the power of fairies or spirits to interfere with the laws of the world and cause miracles. However, magic is not easy to control, and mistakes can affect the body, like how part of Angelica's hand had crystallized. Angelica advised her to study seriously and not repeat her mistakes. A small fairy kept acting spoiled beside Hatori, who asked if she could use magic. Angelica encouraged her to try and summon her familiar, Hugo, who recognized Hatori as the knight's beloved child. Hugo, a water spirit, was very diligent when working. Angelica gave Hatori a crystal and told her to imagine her favorite flower and try to change the crystal through her imagination. Hatori quickly understood how to resonate with the crystal. She remembered seeing a sea of flowers with her mother as a child, followed by her mother's suicide. Thankfully, Ieyasu covered her eyes in time. When Hatori recovered, she found a sea of crystal flowers at her feet. Angelica looked very upset, leading Hatori to apologize. Angelica questioned Ieyasu about Hatori's situation. Ieyasu then confessed that Hatori was the knight's beloved child, a fact he had kept secret. Although Hugo knew the truth, He hadn't told Angelica because of the special significance the knight's beloved child held for fairies. Angelica wasn't angry at Hatori, but blamed Ieyasu for not informing her earlier. She asked Hatori to help fetch cleaning tools, and then told Ieyasu that he would have to pay more. When Hatori returned, Angelica had already prepared new materials, ready to make Hatori a set of equipment. Hatori saw her and Hugo, the water spirit, weaving a beautiful feather garment together. Hatori stared at the crystal flowers she had formed until she received the equipment and left with Ieyasu. On their way back, Ieyasu asked her if she liked poppies. Hatori wasn't sure, as she only remembered seeing a sea of poppies. "Were you traveling to the Golden Triangle?" Ieyasu inquired, aware that Hatori had visited with her mother. He then asked about her family situation and told her that regardless of her past or family, it wouldn't change her current reality since she now had a new home. Hatori mentioned that her father's whereabouts were unknown, but her mother had died in front of her, although she had moved past it. As they arrived at the doorstep, they saw Ieyasu friend. He remarked that Ieyasu was usually a homebody, and wondered why Ieyasu went out as soon as he arrived. Silky, however, didn't want to let him in, denying him even the privilege to enter. This man, named Simon, was the village priest and was busy with both priest and pastor duties. He confessed his fear of magic and his vulnerable state. At that moment, Silky brought sandwiches for Hatori, holding her protectively and eyeing Simon with disdain, clearly disliking him. Hatori noticed that a fairy from Angelica's house had followed her home. Simon mentioned that he knew about Hatori and told her that if she ever felt overwhelmed by Ieyasu, the church would always welcome her. Simon then produced 3 letters that humans couldn't solve, requiring a sorcerer's intervention. These were also to punish Ieyasu for his unilateral actions, having silently taken an apprentice after decades of silence, for which he still had to report to his superiors. Ieyasu stated that he was not under the church's control, although the church did not want to get involved either. It was just a mutual constraint. Ieyasu commented that it had been several hundred years, and his superiors should update their perceptions. Hatori worried that these troubles were because of her, but Simon assured her they were not her fault and involved many issues. He also needed to get medicine from Ieyasu, hoping Hatori would become a skilled sorcerer, thus producing gentle and effective medicine. He emphasized that England was already accustomed to the presence of magic. Ieyasu suggested they could handle affairs while also taking a honeymoon trip, the first stop being Iceland to see active dragons. Hatori was shocked that dragons still existed, only to be snatched away by a dragon the next moment. The blonde man riding the dragon took her to the land where dragons end. Just a moment ago, Hatori was discussing dragons with Ieyasu. Like sorcerers, dragons are nearly extinct, with the few remaining managed in Iceland. Most have a tame disposition. However, neither of them expected a dragon to suddenly snatch Hatori away. A blonde man remarked that although Ieyasu is powerful, he often lets his guard down, joking that he had now lost his apprentice. He pointed towards a great rift valley ahead, known as the dragon's final resting place, some resembling dinosaurs in appearance. After landing, the dragon reluctantly released Hatori. Commanded to let go, Hatori fell into a pool. Surprisingly, Hatori did not seek help to climb out. Previously, she might have just waited to die, but knowing Ieyasu was waiting, she struggled to the shore. There, she encountered a massive rhinoceros-like dragon, blind from age, but attracted to the scent of fresh grass on her. It liked the fragrance. Lindell introduced the dragon as an ilu, a parent of the forest. Its decaying body nurtures the greenery of the earth. Lindell had abducted Hatori because a wind fairy had spread the news of Ieyasu taking an apprentice, and he had followed them, disguised. Lindell, known as the Song of the White Flower, and Ieyasu, called the Thorn of Shadow, had known each other for 300 years. Lindell warned Ieyasu that Hatori was nearly frozen. Ieyasu quickly wrapped her up and summoned a fire spirit to dry her clothes while Lindell chuckled, teasing him for acting grown up. Ieyasu introduced Lindell as the keeper of the dragon nest and a sorcerer like himself, tasked with magically concealing the Rift Valley. Despite his youthful appearance, Lindell was much older than Ieyasu and still playful. Some young dragons insisted on playing with Hatori, while Lindell and Ieyasu discussed recent frequent dragon appearances, linked to food shortages in the valley. While playing with the young dragons until they fell asleep, Hatori enjoyed the warmth of their company. As the old dragon slept, Hatori approached, feeling its weathered skin. The dragon woke up, alerting the young ones, who said that their uncle dragon was returning to nature. They mentioned becoming beautiful trees or grass after their time, revealing that the lush valley was filled with dragon remains. Unlike humans, the dragons embraced death as a part of life's freedom. Hatori, touching the moss on the dragon, asked if it hurt. The dragon, recognizing her gentleness, spoke of life's fairness on Earth, with every species facing death. Having lived a long time, it was ready to pass on life to the next generation. Hatori need not grieve. She said she couldn't do that. She had once thought of jumping to understand life. The old dragon told her that the living should not envy the dead. Hatori doesn't need to fly since she cannot. If Ariasu hadn't met Hatori, he wouldn't know whom to choose as an apprentice. The old dragon saw Hatori's memories. It said that Hatori, who cannot fly, should experience the real joy of flying. It mentioned it no longer had the strength to fly, but it could use its power to show Hatori the joy of flying. Hatori closed her eyes and found herself soaring in the air. In the distance were the sea and the glow of the sunset. It was too dazzling and warm. The old dragon soared with her in the sky. Lindell and Ariasu watched. He said the old dragon was giving Hatori one last dream. Now, the generations of dragons are changing faster. The old dragon is from the old era. If Hatori becomes a sorcerer, she might be the last generation of sorcerers. Ariasu is worried about this. The magic power in Hatori's body flowed into the old dragon during the dream. The knight's beloved child's immense magic sometimes harms herself. She still doesn't know how to control her power. Lindell told Ariasu to teach Hatori how to control her magic. Otherwise, Hatori won't survive 3 years. He insisted Hatori must not leave his side. There are already many rumors about Hatori in the magical world. After all, the knight's beloved child is a coveted being. Ariasu cannot bear to let her go. Lindell also hopes Hatori will grow well. The old dragon told Hatori, "They fly in the sky to find the meaning of life." Hatori understood its message, but she found that a large tree suddenly grew from the old dragon's body. The old dragon was very grateful to Hatori. Because of her power, it could fly in the last moment of its life. Recently, Lindell had planted a seed in its body. It seems to be a seed that can bloom beautiful white flowers. The great tree grew on the old dragon. It told Hatori, as a sorcerer, she would need a staff. In the future, she should come and take it from its body. It wished her good night. The young dragons were not sad. They praised the old dragon for being amazing. They hoped they could also become such great trees someday. Ariasu told Hatori that it was rare to witness the return of dragons, and this was a very beautiful Bodhi tree. Lindell also told Hatori not to grieve. This is nature, and the dragon's view of life and death. Hatori nodded and said goodbye to the 3 young dragons. Ariasu prepared to leave with Hatori. Hatori reminded herself not to grieve. It was like seeing a kind passerby leave, but she felt dizzy and immediately fell unconscious. Honestly, seeing the old dragon pass away so peacefully, Hatori felt somewhat envious. Hatori had a vague dream, hearing the cries of a cat. In the dream, a woman asked the cat if she could have one of its 9 lives. Then, a man entered the room, and Hatori woke up to find herself resting on Ariasu's lap. Surprised by her own exhaustion, Ariasu informed her that they were on the second leg of their honeymoon, traveling on a train not meant for humans. A peculiar waiter informed them that an envoy wished to see them. It was a black cat that could speak human language. As it greeted Ariasu, it comfortably settled onto Hatori's lap. This black cat had lived 7 lives and stated that cats have 9 lives, growing wiser and more formidable with each life spent, even understanding and ruling as kings. They were expected by a cat king in a village that they entered, populated by many cats. According to the black cat, the area thrived with cats due to the absence of cat abusers and a history of cat lovers. Before Hatori could explore further, a cat named Barney, a patrol guard, jumped into her arms, claiming she smelled like a sorcerer who used to visit. Ariasu pulled the cat away, and Barney cheekily remarked that he wouldn't harm Ariasu's wife, amused that even the cats were aware of their relationship. As Hatori walked deeper into the village, she noticed humans averting their gaze but still catching glimpses of her. The kingdom's ruler was a beautiful long-haired cat with heterochromia named Molly, glad to have a sorcerer visit instead of an illusionist. whom the cats despised for being deceitful and lawless. Molly, aware that they were sent by the church, initially claimed there were no issues, but admitted to recent troubles. As Iriyasu agreed to help, a young girl emerged, asking who Hatori was. With Iriyasu gone and others unable to hear the cat speak, Hatori simply commented on the cuteness of the cats on the wall. Molly was the girl's pet and had watched her grow up, considering her as a daughter. Iriyasu disliked children despite lacking magic. They could see through his true nature, sometimes even identifying his identity. He decided to work in the shadows, sensing an unpleasant presence. Molly led Hatori deep into the forest. Molly shared a story older than its 9 lives about a person who enjoyed killing cats. No cat could escape this fate until the first Cat King and survivors attacked and devoured the abuser, sealing the residuals. Each Cat King's duty was to guard and suppress these remnants. At that moment, strange black smoke wafted from the land in the middle of a forest lake, displeasing Hatori. Molly said it was filth, remnants of souls to be purified. Recently, these remnants have been trying to escape their seal. Both cats and humans could lose their lives to this filth. It must do everything possible to prevent the filth from leaking. Even risking its life for its owner's comfort is fine, as no mother would not want to protect her child. Hatori suddenly remembered her own mother and didn't know what to say. But the next second, she was attacked by someone she had seen in the village. A person in red pushed her into the lake, telling Hatori not to blame her. As Hatori sank, she saw another memory. A woman named Mina was ill in bed with a gray cat. Her husband, Matthew, often brought chrysanthemums home, but the cat was always hostile towards him. Matthew told Mina that an illusionist had arrived in town who might have medicine for her illness. This made Mina feel guilty. Matthew told Mina to rest and stop knitting. Lying in bed, Mina stroked the cat and wished she had 9 lives like it. Hatori heard Mina's voice. This was her sin, enjoying Matthew's love as punishment. She was the core of the filth. The filth clung to her, refusing to leave because of her, turning into such an ugly form. Mina said Matthew was her husband and hoped Hatori would help her. Hatori was awakened by Iriyasu, thankfully unharmed. Barney told Iriyasu that the attacker disappeared instantly. The whole town was filled with magic, as if someone was intentionally obstructing their investigation. Iriyasu wanted Hatori to rest, but needed her to purify the filth, as sealing it only postponed the problem. What was needed was not sealing but purifying magic. Although Hatori had not formally used magic before, Iriyasu believed she could do it. Hatori worried about disappointing Iriyasu, but since Iriyasu had expectations, she was willing to try. Molly agreed to help them drive others away. The purification ceremony was set for the evening, but their conversation was overheard by the attacker and a man with a missing arm. The purification ceremony was complex. Hatori wore robes prepared by Iriyasu and took a bouquet as a makeshift wand. Ariel, unexpectedly, was to assist Hatori with the purification. Although Iriyasu was displeased, Ariel was indeed the most suitable for the ceremony because the wind carries everything away, including flesh, bones, trees, and rocks. Iriyasu did not prepare because he was not adept at purification magic. His essence was shadow, less compatible with purification. Hatori remembered Mina's words. Iriyasu touched her face and told her not to worry, to imagine a strong spring wind dispersing everything from winter. If she prayed in her heart for those things to disappear, Ariel would guide her. He hoped Hatori would love this world. Although the world she once knew might not have been friendly, it was not her enemy. Hatori's task was to unlock the lock with the key. These words were learned from a friend. Hatori asked Iriyasu if he liked this world. After a moment of silence, he replied, yes. Hatori found she could walk on water. She held an incense burner in one hand and a bouquet in the other, stepping towards the filth. She feared disappointing Iriyasu with her failure, yet Mina urged her to help Matthew by ending her life. Hatori didn't understand how their relationship had come to this. The filth was right before her eyes. Ariel reassured her not to worry. Hatori wondered if she could only make the filth evolve. Suddenly, the person who attacked her during the day appeared, grabbing Ariel and taking Hatori hostage. A man with a missing arm stepped forward, claiming the filth was useful and shouldn't be purified by Hatori. Molly was furious. Ariyasu instantly recognized the attacker as an illusionist and noted his particular interest in Hatori. Was Hatori also a crucial experiment? He referred to Ariyasu as the Spear of Division. Ariel warned Hatori not to believe the illusionist, who could capture fairies with his woven gloves and was not a true sorcerer. He claimed fairies had also deceived Hatori. Ariyasu argued that sorcerers do not lie or deceive Hatori, but the illusionist countered that they merely withhold the truth, exploiting a naive child to satisfy curiosity. He urged Ariyasu to reveal the fate of the knight's beloved child, predicting its imminent death. Hatori froze. Was she going to die? The knight's beloved child is a gem that generates unlimited magic but is very fragile and could die if neglected. The kidnapper, named Alice, suggested Ariyasu's interest in Hatori was merely out of curiosity. He labeled Ariyasu a monster in human skin, lacking humanity, and claimed he had locked Hatori with a necklace. As he almost strangled Ariel, Hatori struggled and knocked the illusionist away to save Ariel. Molly and others quickly intervened. Regardless of their words, Hatori declared her loyalty to Ariyasu, the first to buy and shelter her. Even if he lied, as long as Ariyasu held on, she would remain his. Alice and her accomplice were driven back by thorns. Ariyasu licked Hatori's wounds, making her blush. With Ariyasu behind her, Hatori no longer feared the illusionist. She and Ariel decided to purify the filth, with Molly jumping into her arms to witness the event. Touching the black mud, Hatori was transported into a memory. She was in a transparent state, but could see Matthew's past memories. In a tavern, Matthew found a white-haired illusionist accustomed to helping travelers. He sought medicine for his wife. The illusionist noted Matthew's kindness to his wife and agreed to meet her. However, Hatori noticed a sinister smile on his face. After diagnosing, the illusionist requested a private talk with Matthew. The cat stared intently at the room door. The illusionist informed Matthew that Mina could live only a few more years. Unwilling to accept this, Matthew expressed his deep love for his wife and his willingness to do anything for her. The illusionist smirked and mentioned his wife's love for cats, hinting at their 9 lives. Soon, Mina was able to get out of bed. With recent reports of many rats and missing cats in the village, she decided to bring food to Matthew in the forest. Villagers said he was deep in the woods, so she headed there. Hatori had a bad feeling as Mina approached a cabin in the deep forest. Hatori wanted to stop her from entering the cabin, but couldn't, being intangible. Mina opened the door and saw the tortured cats. The whole house was filled with caged cats. Her husband cruelly killed these innocent kittens, telling her that her timing was perfect, as the medicine he had prepared for her was ready. The illusionist had told him that cats have 9 lives, so Matthew used them as materials, thinking it unfair that they supposedly had 9 lives. Mina cried, unable to believe her husband capable of such cruelty, but Matthew insisted he could do it if it was for her. Mina wanted to object, but found herself paralyzed. The illusionist appeared at the cabin door, offering her a drink that would free her from her trapped body and grant her eternal life. However, Mina refused. The illusionist forcibly administered the medicine to her, wanting to use her as his guinea pig. Matthew said it would only hurt at the start, but he never expected his wife to explode into mud before him. The illusionist had anticipated this failure, commenting on the strong curse of the beast. He had never told Matthew the truth, merely using the couple as test subjects and then discarding them. Matthew went insane, thinking he had not killed enough cats, which caused his wife's transformation. He rushed out with an axe and saw the cat she had cared for. Just as he was about to strike, the white cat leaped at him, biting through his throat. The cat, elected king by the cats, declared it would not let him live as he had fallen into and become a demon. The cat owed it to its deceased companions. Matthew did not struggle, having lost his wife. He no longer wanted to live. Tears streamed down Hatori's face. Mina did not want her to witness such a terrible memory. She had only wanted Hatori to eradicate them. Their souls would return to the cycle of life, but like the cursed and slain cats, they had forgotten the way back. They hoped Hatori could eradicate them, but she knew they were merely deceived, not needing destruction. Mina was prepared for destruction, but then Molly spoke up. Its life was nearing its 9th and final end, and it might soon reach its conclusion. Perhaps it could lead these lost souls away. Hatori knew the child who cared for it would be heartbroken. Molly said death comes suddenly and visits every life sooner or later. The kings of cats had always sacrificed their souls to suppress filth. Its role was merely to guide, trivial in comparison, and it had left memories with the child, which was sufficient. At that moment, Hatori thought of flowers. She asked Ariel if she could borrow the power of the wind, like seeds carried away by the wind, which returns everything to the soil. Ariel, impressed by Hatori's wisdom, gladly lent her power. Hatori took Mina's hand, asking her to imagine dandelions scattering. When Mina opened her eyes again, she found herself in a blue field of flowers with someone waiting in the distance. Mina embraced her lover, blessing Hatori, and hoping she would not join them too soon. Hatori felt unwanted, but Ariasu had promised her, unsure when she might die. The one-armed illusionist, Mikhail, called Ariasu a tainted being, neither human nor able to revert to a fairy. Ariasus assured that he would not let Hatori die. He questioned Mikhail about how he came to know of Hatori, as the original auction was confidential. Knowing Mikhail was a human supremacist, Ariasu saw how Alice carefully protected him, and suspected Mikhail's sudden closeness to the tainted was related to his severed arm. By then, Hatori had broken the curse. Ariasu approached her, but Mikhail seemed relieved and left with Alice. He warned Ariasu that many coveted Hatori and knew how Ariasu would treat her afterward. When Hatori asked if they knew each other, Ariasu mentioned that Mikhail had long been infamous for his dislike of sorcerers, likely due to a past conflict with one. Previously, Mikhail's arm was intact, suggesting something had happened since. Mikhail stood in front of Alice, preventing the white-haired illusionist from approaching, while Hatori was weakened from excessive use of magic. Ariasu lifted her, and Hatori asked how long she could live. Ariasu estimated 3 years if nothing was done, but reassured her that his plan did not include her death. It was an experiment to keep her alive. Ariasu was curious about the effects of having the knight's beloved child, who could endlessly store magic, by his side. He acknowledged his vast knowledge and longevity, but admitted difficulty in fully empathizing with humans and fairies, understanding their emotions, but unable to feel them himself. He initially bought Hatori simply because the conditions were favorable. Ariasu thought if he provided everything Hatori needed and cared for her diligently, he might comprehend human emotions. He planned to discuss this when Hatori could not leave, but she saw through his rational words to his innocent eyes and reassured him by touching his face, promising to stay before he asked her to leave. Then she fell into a coma, causing the 3 cats standing on Ariasu's shadow to laugh, surprised by Hatori's confession. Another cat remarked it was clearly out of pity, yet she spoke so rationally. Later, Ariasu brought Hatori home. Silky, who often had a stern face, was anxious when delivering meals. Ariasu took responsibility for feeding Hatori, who had been comatose since returning from Cat Town, and was placed beside a fallen log in a deep forest, surrounded by curious birds. She had been unconscious for about 2 weeks. Ariasu mentioned that Hatori's magical capacity was too large, and even Simon came to inquire, feeling it was risky for Ariasu to let a child do such things. However, Ariasu knew Hatori would wake up eventually. For now, she was merely maintaining bodily functions and absorbing magic while asleep. Just as Simon was about to speak, a team suddenly appeared from the depths of the forest. Leading them was a short elf pulling a small horse, on which sat a beautiful woman with long black hair. Simon was stunned, but Ariasu signaled him to stay quiet. This black-haired woman is Titania, the ruler of a part of Britain and the queen of the fairies. She said that aside from her husband, only Ariasu dared to call her by name. Her husband, being too noisy, had been set aside. The queen noticed Simon and mentioned he smelled like a corrupt invader, stating he was not needed here. With a snap of her fingers, she sent Simon lost into another part of the forest as a minor punishment. The queen expressed a desire to meet Ariasu's wife. By then, Oberon was squatting beside Hatori, commenting on her red hair and potential to be a good sorcerer. Oberon, the fairy king, also teased that Ariasu had learned to be jealous. Oberon, who had always drifted as a shadow, had finally settled down with Hatori as his anchor. He wondered how long Ariasu's facade of affection for only Hatori would last. The queen pulled Oberon away, telling him not to bully the child, as they were here to meet Ariasu's wife. Reluctantly, Oberon agreed to wake Hatori. He summoned the massive magical power of the forest and infused it into Hatori's body. Vines grew around Hatori as she opened her eyes to Oberon's satisfaction. He remarked that the knight's beloved child was most beautiful when her eyes were open and noted her heritage from the bird clan. Surprised, Hatori quickly moved closer to Ariyasu. Oberon, not feeling offended, moved closer to the queen and asked when the two planned to have children, suggesting a blonde child would be delightful. Hatori then realized these two were the king and queen of the fairies. The queen had the elves bite Oberon, who seemed to enjoy it. However, the conversation about children made Hatori look at Ariyasu with a shy and fleeting glance. Suddenly, Ariyasu clutched his chest, strangely mentioning a spasm in his organs. The experienced queen chuckled, finding some use in Oberon's comments. The queen was pleased to meet the new sorcerer and hoped the couple would visit the fairy kingdom. Ariyasu stated they would visit unless they were detained. The fairy queen was non-committal, viewing anyone connected to the night world as her beloved child. However, the guiding elf advised against visiting the fairy kingdom, suggesting that half-humans only bring disaster. Ariyasu understood, so they would not visit on their own initiative. Oberon remarked that the guards were too serious, but they responded that beings with physical bodies had sacrificed too much. Oberon noted that it was a human error, with the innocent always suffering alongside humanity. The queen mused not on whether Hatori and Ariyasu could get along well, but on how many children they might have, clearly optimistic about their future together. Simon finally escaped from the forest and was relieved to see Hatori awake. Seeing how late it was, he hurried back. Ariyasu commented that Simon had been foolish for the past 10 years. Hatori wished she had been bought by Ariyasu 10 years earlier. Ariyasu reassured her that they would spend much more than 10 years together, although Hatori was unsure if the experiment would succeed. Ariyasu then lifted her in his arms, promising success. Upon returning, Silky happily served pudding that she had been preparing since Hatori fell unconscious. The taste instantly conquered her taste buds. Indeed, staying here felt very warm. That's it for this video. See you in the next one. Following the Mina incident, illusionist Mikhail and his disciple fled. The mastermind, a white-haired illusionist, threatened Mikhail using Alice. He criticized Mikhail for failing to even cleanse corruption and warned that his disciple could become an experiment. Alice still doesn't understand why her master listens to such a madman, especially since he had lost an arm. Mikhail told her not to overthink it and secretly vowed to protect Alice. Recently, Hatori also began learning to concoct magic potions under Ariyasu due to her constitution as the knight's beloved child, which endears her to sprites and fairies. When Ariyasu came to check, she had just perfected a potion. A curious little sheep fairy from the elf queen's retinue sniffed it and immediately fell asleep, suggesting the calming potion was too potent and had become a sleeping aid. Since discovering Ariyasu's true nature, he has been seriously teaching her magic. Hatori is learning about cause and effect, understanding which beings to help or avoid, peculiar customs, and age-old legends. Of course, she is also learning to distinguish various potions. Ariyasu took Hatori out to meet the church sprites, also known as black fairy dogs, who guard graveyards and typically don't attack humans unless provoked. Hatori asked why the church was after Ariyasu, who explained he had caused trouble in the past and was noted by the church, but he occasionally helps solve their problems, so they turn a blind eye. Hatori remembered another title used for Ariyasu and realized she still had much to learn about him. Ariyasu pulled out a gift box containing a green ring made by Angelica. The knight's beloved child is prone to early death because their body, like a tree, unconsciously absorbs elements from the air, converting them into magic, which weakens the body. The ring controls the production of magic but only suppresses it. Emotional surges can still trigger magic release. Hatori must remain calm, and Ariyasu is determined to cure her. Angelica included a note for Hatori, advising that the right index finger is for guidance, and it's too early to wear the ring on the left ring finger. Hatori remembered that after resolving the corruption, Ariyasu stopped discussing the matter of a wife, leaving her uncertain about his thoughts. Ariyasu planned to find a familiar for Hatori, which would live off her magic and be very reliable, like Silky at home. A familiar would detect physical issues before the master, suitable for someone reticent like Hatori. Upon arriving at the church with Ariyasu, they found a crowd gathered around a corpse. Ariasu quickly pulled Hatori away, instructing her to explore the area but stay calm and avoid impulsiveness or looking at the deceased. Hearing the crowd's murmurs, Hatori turned and walked away from the assembly. Hatori unexpectedly ended up in the church graveyard and found it filled with filth. As Ariasu had been with her for a while, she had let her guard down, leading to her being targeted by the graveyard monsters. She remembered from her childhood that these creatures would take you away if you responded to them. Hatori tried to run, but it was too late. Fortunately, a man with black hair in the graveyard saw her, called her Isabel, and crushed the monster with his bare hands. Hatori realized he wasn't human. She then noticed the man's arm was injured, matching a wound she had seen on a body at the entrance. She hurried to find Ariasu, thinking of treating the man with her own medicine, but he said she looked like Isabel. Then, he transformed into a black fairy dog in front of Hatori. She saw he was somewhat mad, but given his severe injury, he couldn't move freely. She hugged the black fairy dog to prevent more rash actions. He eventually collapsed. Hatori hadn't noticed that Alice, whom she had met before, was behind her and had already checked the dog's wounds, which were clearly inflicted by someone else, proving the dog was not the culprit. Suddenly, Alice appeared, demanding Hatori hand over the black fairy dog, claiming she wouldn't harm Hatori but needed the dog. Hatori said she wouldn't let go without a good reason, as the dog had saved her life. Alice insisted on taking the dog and was about to act, but Hatori knocked her out with a sleeping potion. Meanwhile, the black fairy dog dreamed of his sister Isabel, a girl with long red hair often maligned by others. He loved her deeply, sleeping on her lap. When he woke up, he found Hatori standing by with Alice covered by a coat. Hatori had lit incense to dispel sprites and asked about his injuries. The dog, Jurek, said he and Isabel were human and that he had watched her grow up. Hatori asked about his injuries, but Jurek was unsure. Alice woke up, surprised to find herself alive and tied up. Faced with her puzzled look, Hatori decided to ask her some questions, such as why she wanted to capture Jurek. After a pause, Alice explained that they needed Jurek for a chimera, a creature created by magically merging various animals. She mentioned that a strange imp had approached her and her master, Mikhail, for help in gathering materials. Mikhail had refused but was threatened. Alice said she didn't care about herself, but didn't want Mikhail to be harmed. She admitted she cared deeply for Mikhail, saying she had been taken in by her master due to her magical talent, despite having no good fortunes in life. Alice confessed she would do anything for her master's sake, though she hadn't expected Ariasu to have been hiding in Hatori's shadow and listening to everything. Ariasu glanced at Jurek, realizing he had recently turned into a black fairy dog. Alice asked Ariasu if he could deal with the strange imp. Ariasu countered, asking what benefit this would bring him. Alice explained that the imp had unleashed a chimera nearby, and both the bodies outside the church and Jurek's wounds were caused by this chimera. She warned that if they got involved, even her family's cat wouldn't be safe. Unexpectedly, Ariasu agreed to help. He thought ignoring the problem would only lead to more trouble with the church. He asked Alice about the illusionist imp. Alice admitted she didn't know much. Suddenly, Hatori sensed something was wrong, pushed Alice away, and was then stabbed in the back by vines. A white-haired illusionist appeared, declaring Hatori just an experiment and expendable, claiming Ariasu had no attachment to humans. Alice looked terrified, recalling Mikhail's warning that Ariasu was like a sorcerer from fairy tales, sometimes helping humans but also showing his fangs and enjoying pretending to be human. Shocked, Alice watched Ariasu transform into a monster and protect the injured Hatori. The white-haired illusionist was surprised by Ariasu's anger, thinking humans were replaceable. Ariasu tore apart the chimera behind him. Jurek caught Hatori, reminded of his sister Isabel when he saw Hatori's serious injuries. He pressed his forehead against hers, and Hatori saw a memory. Jurek asked Isabel if she had been teased, and she complained about her uncontrollable red hair and eye color. Jurek adored her and often played with her. However, Isabel, distinct in appearance, was ostracized and chased by village children, fleeing into a street and being fatally hit by a passing carriage. Jurek, as a dog, didn't know she had died, thinking she was just asleep, waiting for her to wake up until his life faded. Hatori realized she was crying when she opened her eyes to see Jurek weeping. She comforted him, saying she had woken up. With Jurik's help, Hatori saw Ariasu angry. The white-haired illusionist lamented his lost chimera, not expecting Ariasu to know his name, Catafels, which he hated being called, especially by someone like Ariasu, disguised as a human. As they were about to fight, Hatori hugged Ariasu, and Mikhail held a gun to Catafels' head, mocking him for calling others monsters, then shot him with a bullet designed to prevent regeneration. Ariasu thought Hatori would fear him. As he backed away, saying he would change back, Hatori told him it was fine as it was, joking about not wanting to break the door when returning home. She showed no fear. Ariasu quietly returned to his original form, mentioning Silky would be angry if he damaged the door. Hatori said it was okay, they would just apologize. As Ariasu and Hatori continued, Jurik tugged at Hatori's sleeve, and Mikhail was surprised by Hatori's taste. He scolded his apprentice severely. When he saw the note, he thought he had been abandoned. He told Alice that as a guardian, she must not leave her master's side. Alice then stared at him eagerly. Unexpectedly, Catafels managed to get up. Mikhail questioned Catafels, as it's widely acknowledged that illusionists should not enter a sorcerer's domain. Catafels, why did you attack the fairy? Catafels simply replied, "It's fun. A chimera can merge with a fairy to create a new child, but the fairy's curse is terrifying, so I wanted the illusionist to become the fairy's collar." He turned Isabella's body into a chimera. Jurik instinctively tried to approach, but Hatori stopped him, telling him this was not the Isabella he knew. She recognized Catafels as the illusionist who had deceived Mina and her husband. Facing this villain, Hatori was determined not to let him take Jurik away. Angered, Hatori's magic broke free. She remembered Ariasu saying, "Magic is making what's in your heart tangible, whether turning stone to gold, making fish fly, or keeping crops from rotting. But those things are not to be done." So, Hatori summoned the spider's natural enemies. Catafels remarked that those creatures were too small and would be easily devoured. Ariasu tried to stop the enraged Hatori, but his arm was devoured in the process. Luckily, magic quickly restored it. But they must not twist the rules of the world. Ariasu embraced Hatori, and someone used magic to whisk them away, feeling the chimera's arms break. Sometimes Catafels wondered why he must capture fairies and why he made chimeras, but he could no longer remember, acting only on instinct. The one who took Hatori and the others was a blue fire fairy, commonly known as a will-o'-the-wisp, actually a fairy. Hatori was nervous, feeling she hadn't listened to Ariasu. Ariasu quickly comforted her. Jurik was also very worried about Hatori's condition. The ghostly fairy lent her a small stone, which helped her recover somewhat. The ghostly fairy chided Jurik for acting like a puppy towards the dead, telling him to revert to his original form and complete his mission. He was responsible for chasing grave robbers to the gates of hell as a black fairy dog. Jurik understood that no matter how long he waited, his sister would not return. He sidled up to Hatori and asked if he could stay by her side, offering everything to Hatori. The ghostly fairy was helpless. Although Hatori is the knight's beloved child, how could a fairy actively seek to bond with a human? This was the highest form of shared contract among familiars, sharing emotions and time. If Hatori died, Jurik would also die. Jurik didn't mind, knowing her constitution from the moment he saw her. Hatori asked him if he was no longer waiting for Isabel. At this moment, Catafels, with the chimera, chased after them. Hearing Mikhail call his name, he was angry and wanted to attack, but Ariasu blocked him, and Alice took the opportunity to retaliate, also breaking one of his arms. As for Mikhail's arm, it had already become material for the chimera. He didn't plan to get it back. Jurik didn't want to be taken by Catafels. He preferred to live and die with Hatori. Hatori understood his feelings, having been homeless herself, so she promised not to let Jurik wander alone. She immediately cut her palm and signed a contract with Jurik, giving him a new name, Ruth. Catafels couldn't believe it. Had he been outwitted? Ruth bit into Isabel's corpse to bid farewell to his sister from days past. He was prepared to meet her in reincarnation after his and Hatori's lives ended. Isabel closed her eyes in relief. Catafels regretfully stated that the contract was hard to break, so he simply gave up on Jurik. He did this because he did not want to age and die waiting, as he didn't know when the end would come, which was very painful for him. He also couldn't remember why he had transformed his body in this way. Iriasu commented that this guy was more troublesome than a natural disaster. Cadafal's, known to be cursed with immortality by an ancient deity's child, acted solely on his whims without a clear purpose. Mikhail was coerced into helping find materials. Iriasu warned him to be careful after returning. Meanwhile, Alice stuffed something into Hatori's hand before hastily leaving with Mikhail. The will-o'-the-wisp returned the souls trapped in the chimera's body to the graveyard. Hatori and Ruth went home together. From now on, Ruth's home was Hatori's home, and Hatori's family joyfully welcomed a new member. After returning, Ruth often patrolled around the house and happily pounced on Hatori when he came home. Hatori was very concerned about Ariasu's condition since the church incident, especially since he hadn't left his room for 2 weeks and wasn't eating even the food Silky prepared. Ruth guessed that Ariasu had used too much magical power transforming and told Hatori she could ask him directly if she was worried. Despite her concerns, even Silky noticed something was off and handed Hatori a wallet and coat, pushing her and Ruth out the door to clear her mind. Just at the doorstep, they met Angelica, who had come looking for Hatori. They drove to town together, where Hatori bought many things for the house. Angelica checked a ring and asked if Hatori had been feeling unwell recently. Hatori shook her head, but Ruth betrayed her by revealing that Hatori often felt sleepy, especially after using magic. Angelica advised her not to always think of others, as it could be easy to trip up when alone. She noted that Hatori had high stamina but a fragile heart and should not overexert herself. On the way back, Angelica asked if Hatori wasn't attending school considering her age. Hatori initially thought she could learn at home and felt secure there, but Angelica said this dependency wasn't good. Hatori was young with a long road ahead and shouldn't just get by. She knew about Hatori's past, but insisted that Hatori shouldn't give herself entirely to Iriasu without reservation. Hatori almost lost her temper, but immediately apologized. Angelica wasn't angry, but admitted she might have spoken too harshly. She hoped Hatori wouldn't be too honest. Hatori felt despicable for getting close to those who didn't mind her and thought being abandoned was okay. Yet she didn't want to be abandoned. She saw herself as very selfish. Ruth, sensing her memories and emotions, knew her mother had left her with psychological scars and wanted to help Hatori move forward soon. That evening, Hatori returned home and courageously pushed open Ariasu's door. Ruth didn't react in time, and Hatori was quickly dragged into the room, which was then shut. Ariasu had transformed into a monstrous form and explained that he couldn't control his appearance and could only maintain this shape temporarily. Hatori didn't resist and even felt somewhat reassured. That night, Silky noticed that Hatori didn't come out for dinner and was already sharpening knives outside the door. Meanwhile, Ariasu nearly lost control and almost devoured Hatori in the middle of the night. Hatori dreamed of the words her mother said when she abandoned her. When she awoke, it was already dawn, and only a letter was left on the dresser. Upon leaving the room, she found Ruth had been waiting outside all night. After taking a bath, Hatori asked Silky if she knew where Iriasu had gone. Silky shook her head and handed her a shawl. Then Hatori and Ruth set out to search for Iriasu. Dorsai was surprised to see them, and Ruth, suspicious, shielded Hatori. Dorsai claimed he hadn't seen Iriasu, prompting Hatori to turn around and leave. Ruth told Hatori that she clearly loved Iriasu as she was searching everywhere for him out of concern more than fear. Ruth urged Hatori not to deny it, emphasizing the importance of loving things beyond oneself, much like his love for Hatori and Isabel. "Darn dogs truly are the best companions to their owners," he exclaimed. Soon they came across a garden where an old man was watering plants. Hatori noticed a fairy hanging on the man. The fairy, recognizing Hatori as the knight's beloved child, advised her not to reveal her identity. Ruth recognized the fairy as a vampire that feeds on men's blood and grants them abilities. Typically, such fairies would seek younger men since this old man couldn't withstand her feeding. The fairy curiously looked at Hatori and identified her as Iriasu's lover, to which Hatori corrected that she was just his disciple. Ruth quickly grabbed the fairy, warning her to stay away from Hatori. However, the old man invited Hatori in for tea. Ruth agreed that Hatori needed rest and went out to continue searching for Iriasu, warning the fairy not to harm Hatori, or he would tear her apart. The old man, named Garland, enjoyed reading and writing. He even showed Hatori one of his short romance stories set in a rose garden. After Hatori finished reading, the fairy, leaning against Garland, asked if it was a good story. Hatori nodded, acknowledging that it wasn't the fairy's granted ability, but Garland's own talent. She sensed the fairy hadn't fed on him, because when Garland was younger, the fairy couldn't find a reason profound enough to feed on him or bestow any abilities, leaving her uncertain of her feelings. After Garland woke up, he walked Hatori out, discussing the rose garden from his story. He mentioned having seen a beautiful woman there once. As he looked up, he recognized the fairy standing beside Hatori, reached out, but the fairy had disappeared. They locked eyes again, possibly influenced by Hatori. Just as Hatori began to inquire about the fairy's feelings for Garland, the fairy kissed her, stating that this wasn't the answer she sought. Their kind of fairies express love through blood-sucking and granting abilities, thus she hadn't fallen in love with Garland. After another kiss, she encouraged Hatori to visit again, assuring that Garland would be delighted. Hatori felt unworthy of discussing love. Ruth sent a remote message, informing her that Ariasu was found in the northern forest. Hatori rushed there immediately. She discovered Ariasu soaking in the water and quickly embraced him. Hatori expressed her frustration about him not sharing anything with her, questioning why he had changed and what kind of creature he was. Despite his evasive responses, Ariasu mentioned that Hatori was understanding and accepted whatever he said. Angrily, Hatori retorted that her understanding didn't mean she didn't care about him and that she wanted to know more about him. Surprised by her expression, Ariasu seriously explained that he had left a note. Hatori showed disdain for the note, concerned about how she could be at ease with such a message if he suddenly disappeared. Ariasu promised to organize some information before sharing more about himself. Hatori reluctantly agreed to wait. Beside her, Ruth sighed, feeling they were being deceived again. As Ariasu noticed Hatori seemed upset, he was about to inquire when something fell from the sky, hitting him on the head. A dolphin-like sprite climbed onto Hatori's head, revealing itself to be Lindel's familiar, sent to invite Hatori to the dragon's realm. The familiar explained that Lindel heard about Hatori's limited magic skills and wanted to craft a wand for her that could convey a sorcerer's intentions to neighbors. It also mentioned that only Hatori was invited because Lindel wanted to spend time with his granddaughter, finding Ariasu a nuisance. Shocked, Hatori wondered if Ariasu was Lindel's son. Ariasu agreed to let Hatori go alone, causing her some panic. Ruth quietly spoke up, insisting on accompanying her. The dragon that arrived was one of the 3 young dragons that had grown fond of Hatori and had grown large enough for her to ride. Early in the morning, Silky prepared a packed lunch for Hatori. Hatori quickly grabbed her items, and along with Ruth, donned a cloak. They mounted the dragon, led by the familiar Selkie. Glancing at Ariasu one last time, Hatori said nothing. Selkie used invisibility magic. Being a sea dweller, she could transform into both seal and human forms. After applying a misty protective layer, the dragon swiftly crossed the clouds, bringing them to Iceland where Lindel awaited. Meanwhile, Ariasu watched from afar, concerned for Hatori. Lindel, noticing Ruth, commented on Hatori finding a good family member. Lindel also boasted about buying clothes on the street, making himself look handsome, which made Hatori laugh, noting the similarity to Ariasu. Lindel introduced Hatori to a reindeer pulling a cart and explained that the dragon's realm was a sanctuary formed hundreds of years ago by the first steward who gathered the world's remaining dragons. Lindel, originally a nameless nomad, received his name from his master. Lindel led Hatori and the others under a Bodhi tree and handed her a saw, telling her he was going to cook and that she should saw some wood herself. Hatori slipped and fell, but luckily Ruth caught her in time and scolded her harshly. Selkie commented that Ruth was overreacting, as a fall wouldn't kill her. Hatori thought about making her own wand and climbed up again after taking off her coat. After Hatori left, Ariasu was distracted. Although Hatori usually didn't talk much, her absence made the house feel unusually cold. Then he received a letter from a small bird, sent by Adolf from the Academy management. Adolf wanted to discuss Hatori's future as a human with Ariasu. That evening, Hatori tasted Lindel's cooking, and he also healed a scrape on her hand. His hands were known as healing hands, capable of curing anything non-fatal. Such people used to be more common, but had become rare over the past centuries. Curious, Hatori asked Lindel how long he had lived and if other sorcerers also had long lives. Lindel was shocked, realizing Ariasu hadn't told Hatori anything. Hatori admitted she hadn't asked. Lindel mentioned he called Hatori over because he was worried about her. as Ariyasu seemed to be trying to tame her like a reindeer, yet she seemed to accept it. Hatori confessed that her mother had once said she wished Hatori hadn't been born. Her mother had fled from her, then died, and Hatori believed her father and brother probably also wanted to escape from her. Only Ariyasu kept her by his side, so she never touched on topics Ariyasu didn't want to discuss, always obedient. Lindell didn't see it that way. He decided to tell Hatori a story and punish the one who made her sad. The story began long before the Industrial Revolution and the surge of oil. Sorcerers had long realized they were different from ordinary people, able to see spirits and perform miracles, sometimes living much longer than humans, possibly as their fated destiny. Some couldn't accept this and sought reasons, wondering if they had been given a mission. Many fellows fell while searching for their origins. During such a time, Lindell couldn't accept this reality. While searching for his origins, wolves appeared around him, but Lindell didn't see them. Instead, he found Ariyasu, who looked monstrous and was attacked by the wolves. Ariyasu said he was hungry and then fell unconscious. Lindell took him in and asked where he came from. Ariyasu didn't know, waking up in the forest, always avoiding humans and exhausted by the time he reached this place. Lindell thought he was clearly a spirit but had a human body. Unsure of what Ariyasu really was, he decided to take him to meet his master, and it was then that Ariyasu first learned about sorcerers. Lindell used magic to find his master's direction in front of Ariyasu. In thick fog, he led Ariyasu walking on water. Ariyasu looked around curiously. Lindell teased him, urging him to taste the seawater. They reached a seaside cabin where a woman with dark skin, resembling a research scholar, emerged. She was Lindell's master, Rahab. Rahab often criticized Lindell for not communicating with others, yet was surprised he had brought back Ariyasu. She commented on Ariyasu's tall stature, suggesting he take on a human form, which caused Ariyasu to subconsciously transform into a child. Rahab examined him and found his nature closely aligned with elves and fairies, though mixed with some human elements. She suggested that a human cursed might be simpler, but Ariyasu's case seemed the opposite. When asked about his memories before wandering, Ariyasu recalled only redness. They did not press him to remember. Rahab assigned Lindell to take care of Ariyasu, saying it was time he took an apprentice. She did not insist on Lindell being friendly towards his enemies, but noted that their neighbors were harming them. Guiding the lost is a sorcerer's duty. Lindell remarked that it wasn't about wanting to be loved, either for him or Rahab. Rahab mentioned that curses and blessings are essentially the same, depending on one's perspective. Ariyasu, not wanting to cause trouble, prepared to leave, but the proud Lindell ultimately kept him, treating him like someone familiar. Ariyasu did not understand the purpose, so Rahab defined him as family, warmly giving him a name and a necklace, encouraging him to slowly find answers. Lindell snapped back to reality as Mikhail intercepted a message from a small bird, warning Ariyasu that if Hatori continued this way, living together might end disastrously. Was not Hatori now as lost as Ariyasu once was? After the bird from Mikhail had gone, Ariyasu fell into contemplation while Lindell's story to Hatori continued. Ariyasu, now named, lived with Lindell, chasing reindeer in the snow-capped mountains through all seasons. Occasionally, despite not eating rabbits, Ariyasu would still catch them, making Lindell realize he might be lacking something. Though smart, Ariyasu seemed more like an observer. As their food supply dwindled, Lindell took Ariyasu to a human village to exchange healing for food. They encountered a child with a fever. Lindell intended to use his own medicine, but the child could see Ariyasu hiding in Lindell's shadow, leading the villagers to accuse Lindell of kidnapping. The villagers attacked, and seeing Lindell hurt, Ariyasu intervened. Sensing danger, Lindell swiftly used magic to transport them elsewhere, but they had to leave quickly. Lindell was fading, but Ariyasu carried him and, using Lindell's previous methods, found a way out. When Lindell awoke, Ariyasu was already cooking, remarking he might have eaten people before. Upon hearing this, both Lindell at the time and Hatori hearing the story now were shocked. Lindell asked Hatori how she felt about Ariyasu, who might have eaten humans. Hatori recalled a night when Ariyasu almost attacked her. She revealed she could see monsters from a young age, many of whom discussed the sensation of eating humans. Although she was very scared then, she was never afraid of Ariyasu. She was about to express this when Lindell stopped her and suggested she tell Ariyasu directly. He wanted Hatori to maintain this attitude and talk with Ariasu. Lindell had responded to the question himself by joking that he looked tasty and warned Ariasu to be careful not to eat him. Ariasu was shocked and quickly assured he would not, although he confessed he sometimes had urges to eat humans despite his reluctance. Lindell noted that many creatures eat humans and that he would not shun or fear Ariasu for this. Instead, he suggested Ariasu eat other things to forget the taste of humans. Hatori was relieved that now Silky was taking care of their home. Lindell described humans as more fearful and cruel than any creature. He advised Ariasu to keep this matter to himself, although he was uncertain what Ariasu really thought. Lindell noted that Ariasu still had the mind of a child, and Hatori wondered if she looked appetizing to him and what would happen if she asked about something Ariasu did not want to discuss. The next day, Hatori was washing her face by the lake when a dragon that liked her knocked her into the water, where she spotted a beautiful long dragon. She happily shared this with Ruth. Later, Lindell cut her hair, explaining that it harbored magical power suitable for a wand core. Hatori's rare red hair was particularly attuned to magic, symbolizing the earth's colors of flowing flame and blood. Lindell offered her several handle choices, with fire sprites drying the wood. The wand had no specific shape, and Lindell let Hatori carve it herself, assisting with the finishing touches. Carving the wand also allowed for self-reflection, a tradition among sorcerers. Hatori was unsure how to converse with herself. Ruth stayed by her side as she pondered her own matters for the first time and began carving the wand. Lindell instructed the dragons not to disturb her. That evening, he reminded her it was time to rest, estimating the wand would be finished the next day. Lindell asked Hatori to wait a little longer as the land would bloom with flowers that night, nurturing and loving its fairies. Lindell's title is Song of the White Flower. For sorcerers or illusionists, the name holds great significance. Lindell's spells are sung, and his singing makes the sprites dance. He invited Hatori to join in. Singing originated before language, early in ancient times, and magic has always been with Hatori, usable as long as she can imagine. While admiring the scenery, Hatori wondered if Ariasu could see it too. To her surprise, she saw Ariasu's reflection in the water. Ariasu was astonished. How could Hatori use the water mirror magic? He guessed it was because Lindell was singing, thus connecting the magic. Hatori noticed Ariasu looked troubled. He confessed that without her, home felt cold and dull. Hatori mentioned she had heard a story about him from Lindell, and she would share her untold stories with him and return after finishing her wand. Lindell felt like he was raising a child. Unbeknownst to Hatori, her home had grown especially cold in her absence, lacking even a fire. After Hatori left, Ariasu was downhearted. Despite many tasks in summer, he lacked motivation. Initially, he thought of Hatori as a merely nominal apprentice, brought for observation. However, Hatori's unique physique and her candid and close demeanor surprised him, although she spoke little at that time. Hatori also dreamed of Ariasu. When she woke up, her wand was finished. Lindell explained that she fell asleep because the creation consumed her magic, and the wand contained this magic. He was finishing the wand and mentioned that Ariasu should have taught her this knowledge. Hatori admitted she didn't ask Ariasu to avoid bothering him, but Lindell reassured her that caring for a fledgling was not a bother, recalling Ariasu had once troubled him too. Lindell rated Hatori's intuition higher than Ariasu's. Lindell pulled out 2 blue gems from his bag, gifts from a friend, bathed in sunlight and moonlight at the lake's bottom for 1,000 years. He used these gems as eyes on the wand and resumed his blessing song. Hatori's cut hair was also incorporated into the wand, turning it red. Hatori, swinging high in the air with the wand, saw an old dragon behind her. The old dragon told her that through the wand, they were connected by a thread. This place was a junction for travelers and those ending their journeys, a meeting point of 2 worlds. The dragon saw what was in Hatori's world. It told her she often looked unhappy but could be open here, as it was the only dragon. Hatori admitted her greed. Initially indifferent to being abandoned, she chose not to rely on Ariasu. Seeing him indifferent comforted her, even if it was pretend. Ariasu still called her family. However, she grew discontent and lonely when she realized Ariasu kept secrets from her. She wanted to keep her feelings for Ariasu indifferent so that she wouldn't feel dissatisfied. She was prepared to not mind even if abandoned. The old dragon asked Hatori if Ariasu had ever said he would abandon her at any time, or if the worries she had were actually ever realized. Hatori shook her head, and the old dragon advised her not to worry too much. Hatori was concerned that it might happen in the future. She feared she would quickly be disliked because of her mother, leaving her with a psychological shadow. However, the old dragon expressed gratitude towards Hatori's parents. Normally, when animals cannot survive, they abandon or even kill their young because they can just have more. But Hatori's mother had let go instead of strangling Hatori. Despite crying out that she wished she had never given birth to her, and she ultimately chose suicide, the dragon noted that Hatori's arrival allowed it to fly in its final moments and purified Mina's family and the cats because of her. It said that by belittling herself, Hatori was also dismissing those she had saved. Hatori said she never thought that way, but felt she had just unintentionally done some things. The dragon responded that she should still be proud of her actions since those lives were saved because of her, and they were grateful to her parents for raising her. The dragon told Hatori she was free. Even if she carried a curse for life and fell because of it, her future was hers to decide. It hoped Hatori would live not for others, but by following her own heart. Hatori's wand was also the dragon's wand. No matter where she was, it would light her path. She could go anywhere she wanted. The dragon urged Hatori to speak her mind immediately because words lose their fragrance over time. Lindell saw Hatori daydreaming and was surprised to hear she had met the old dragon. Hatori thanked him for his hospitality but said she had to return immediately. Lindell, surprised yet seeing her determination, no longer asked questions and smiled reassuringly, offering to call a flying dragon for her. But at that moment, Ruth brought Hatori's backpack. Following Lindell's advice, Hatori used magic, which the fire sprites loved, and they immediately appeared to help her transform into a phoenix and fly away. Lindell was left sitting on the ground, surprised by her resilient and bold personality, akin to a phoenix rising from ashes. Hatori flew home and was caught by Ariasu. Unsure how to explain, she was embraced by him, who was glad she had returned. Just as she was about to speak, she found herself too tired from the magic-intensive flight from the dragon's realm. Hatori had more to say, but fell asleep. Silky immediately rushed out with a blanket. Ariasu, holding her hand, didn't hear what she wanted to say, but felt the warmth. Hatori had another dream. As a child, she told her mother about monsters in the alley, which frightened her. Her mother wasn't surprised and told her not to be afraid of them because showing fear would only draw them closer. Her father carried her on his shoulders, promising to keep those creatures at bay as long as he was there. Her parents praised her for being brave at that time. Her mother was pregnant with her unborn brother. It was a rare dream where her mother neither cried nor got angry. Upon waking, Hatori noticed many lambs outside her window. Ruth said he couldn't help chasing them if they stayed. Seeing Hatori awake, Silky also felt relieved. Ariasu downstairs greeted Hatori as well. Hatori found it incredible that, not long ago, she couldn't imagine living in such a warm place, but now she was starting to accept everything about herself. The knots in her heart haven't unraveled yet. Let's see what a mess you two can become. Recently, something has been watching Hatori. It wants to see how far Hatori and Ariasu can go. Lately, the sheep outside Hatori's home have become very fluffy. To be precise, these are fairies known as wool bugs that grow wool by absorbing cold air. They are more like living creatures, and most humans can't see them. This year, there seems to be an unusually high number of wool bugs. One of them jumped into Hatori's arms. Ariasu took Hatori to shear these wool bugs, useful for making magic and illusion props, a task requested by Angelica. The remaining wool can be used to make pillow fillings, which are said to allow one to dream about whatever they wish. Thus, Hatori decided to collect some wool. She accidentally sheared one bug too close. Ariasu said he would get something to carry the wool and asked Hatori to continue shearing, instructing her to call him if she saw any other bugs. Hatori was deep in thought. She had intended to confess her feelings to Ariasu upon returning, but she was unsure how to express them and felt the timing might be off. She looked towards Ruth, hoping he would understand her intentions, but Ruth gave her no clues. Just then, Hatori saw a blue wool bug, and before she could react, it pounced on her. She pulled out her wand to drive away the bug, and Ruth immediately rushed to protect her. However, the flames were ineffective. Fortunately, Ieyasu came out in time and chased the creature back to the fields. This bug was different as it lived by absorbing warmth, which it took from Hatori, leaving her shivering with cold. Ruth told Ieyasu that the bug had attacked Hatori first. Ieyasu understood that being the breeding season in summer, the bugs were probably hungry. They needed to find a way to warm Hatori up. When Hatori woke up, the wool bugs were lying on top of her, much warmer than earlier. Embarrassed, she stood up to look for Ruth, who was on patrol. But Ieyasu grabbed her hand and asked why the house felt cold and dull after she left. Hatori was still thinking about the right moment to speak. Ieyasu asked about her time in the Dragon Kingdom. Hatori said there were many new things in the Dragon Kingdom, and both Lindell and the old dragon had given her a lot of courage. She had also heard stories about Ieyasu's past. She boldly asked Ieyasu if she looked appetizing, surprising him. Hatori realized she had seen something significant that night. At first, she thought it was a dream, but it was confirmed when Lindell spoke to her about it. Ieyasu instinctively picked up his wand, wanting Hatori to forget that memory. But she slapped his hand away and hugged him tightly, declaring that he was important to her, and she did not want to forget. Ieyasu asked if she wasn't afraid of him, given that humans generally found him terrifying. Hatori tilted her head, noticing that Ieyasu seemed fearful of her fear. As Ieyasu held her, Hatori shared her own story. She has parents and a younger brother. As a child, her parents could see those things. Their relationship was harmonious, but non-human monsters often came, making Hatori very scared. She felt safe when her father was around. However, one day her father suddenly left with her brother. Her mother looked very tired, so she left Hatori alone and departed. Hatori loved her family, but no one took her with them. Afraid of getting hurt, she told herself not to fantasize about her family anymore. But Ieyasu called her family, and he envisioned a future, including her. If treated like family, she would want to understand him. But Ieyasu did not tell her anything. However, Hatori was happy when Lindell told her about the past. Hatori said she was not afraid of Ieyasu himself, but afraid of being abandoned by him. Ieyasu said humans can lie, but Hatori is his apprentice, so he trusts her. Silky and Ruth quietly observed from the side. Ieyasu admitted he did not understand emotions, so he proactively asked Hatori. He felt cold and dull without Hatori around. He asked what this meant to humans. Hatori said it might be loneliness. Ieyasu suddenly felt emotional. He hugged Hatori, who realized his heart was still childlike, though his body had grown. Ieyasu was glad to have brought Hatori back, because he learned something new. Hatori felt that she was Ieyasu's teacher in human aspects. Ieyasu was satisfied and hugged her closely. They were each other's teachers. Ieyasu saw Hatori's wand. He said he should have made the wand, as it's customary in the magical world for seniors to bless juniors. Hatori said if she needed a second wand, she would ask Ieyasu. Ieyasu said he would wait, but he still did not talk about himself. Hatori was not in a hurry. She heard about a bird that had recently visited, but she was unclear about its purpose. Hatori planned to study magic lately. She remembered opening a cupboard, finding a note Alice left before leaving, but she did not pay attention to the note. During this time, a goat-like person visited. Hatori looked through a magic stone, seeing a creature covered in eyes. She continued studying at home during this period, with Ieyasu by her side. Silky smiled reassuringly, but soon Simon suddenly visited, saying he needed some medicine he had been taking. Seeing him cough, Hatori brought him a cup of water. Simon talked to her about Ieyasu's past, saying he was somewhat Ieyasu's overseer and had secretly observed him before, always being discovered because of his cough. Ieyasu tapped his head with a wand, then gave him a cup of water, commenting that Ieyasu was a gentle person. That evening, another guest visited. According to Ieyasu, the visitor was called Grey Eyes. Hearing about a new sorcerer's birth, who happened to know Ieyasu, he came to visit. But it was not human, so Ieyasu warned Hatori to be careful. Grey Eyes said it did not intend to harm Hatori. Hatori smelled sand on it, and the next second, it pulled out a fox skin. By the time Ieyasu reacted, Hatori had been turned into a red fox, carrying the magic stone given by Ieyasu. Hatori was told by Grey Eyes to leave, mentioning her final destination would be her new home. Grey Eyes stopped Ieyasu from pursuing her. Ariasu asked if it really disliked humans who could bind Grey Eyes with their gaze. Grey Eyes shook its head, explaining that Hatori would return if she wished, and that keeping her in a non-human form might be more convenient. Ariasu picked up a ring, expressing his dislike for the cold feeling, then transformed into a shadow to follow. Hatori, now a red fox, had lost her memory. She did not know her name or where to go, but she felt a liberating sense of freedom. Ruth followed and said he would go wherever Hatori went. Ariasu, also in animal form, caught up and shared that he still had much to learn and would be troubled without Hatori, as he disliked the cold and loneliness. Hatori transformed back into a human and embraced him, sharing her dislike for the cold and loneliness, and decided to return with Ariasu. Hatori still felt dizzy. Ariasu explained it was like a curse, typically turning them into werewolves using wolf skin, but in Hatori's case it was fox skin, which could also grant wishes. Although Grey Eyes played a prank, it actually gave a valuable gift, though Hatori was hesitant to use it. Hatori worried about suddenly traveling far away. Ariasu told her he would stop her if she didn't want to go, but also to stop her if she did want to go. Just then, a fairy lover flew over, pleading with Hatori to save Garland. Ariasu watched as Hatori immediately rushed out, using magic to open Garland's door. She listened to his heartbeat, finding it very weak. Ariasu appeared from the shadows, noting that Garland was near death, and asked if the fairy lover would not consume him. The fairy was shocked, claiming she had not consumed any of Garland's blood. However, Ariasu mentioned that the vampire's future was sealed when it attached to someone. Disbelieving, the fairy thought of leaving quickly. Ariasu said it was too late as she had already acted against Garland. Hatori interrupted Ariasu, asking him to take care of Garland while she went downstairs to talk with the fairy. The fairy was unsure if she had fallen in love with Garland and why she hadn't consumed his blood, struggling with her racial instincts. If she loved him, she felt compelled to complete her mission, leaving Hatori saddened by her pain. Garland woke up to see Ariasu disguised as a human, who told him he was dying. Garland appeared calm, naturally fearing death like any human. His wife had died earlier, and though she was a match made by family, he mourned her passing. However, the rose garden she left behind freed him from his grief, providing an encounter like a fantasy. If possible, he hoped to meet the young woman with red eyes again. Hatori was very sad. She suddenly remembered reading about a fairy ointment in a book, which, when applied to the eyes, allows one to see fairies. She hoped to at least speak to them once. However, revealing the creation of this ointment would anger other fairies. Despite this, Hatori rarely made requests, and Ariasu really did not want to refuse her. He only cautioned her to be careful. Neither Ariasu nor Ruth could assist her, as fairies instinctively do not want humans to see them. Fortunately, Hatori's exceptional talent enabled her to successfully create the medicine, though it needed 5 days to mature. During this time, Ariasu took care of Garland, and Hatori couldn't leave the medicine. Yet even so, the success rate was only 50%. A fairy asked why she was working so hard. Hatori responded that both the fairy and Garland had smiled at her, so she wanted to protect those smiles. Filled with great hope for the medicine, Hatori's blessing spread to the fairies, many of whom sensed a gentle fragrance. Oberon sensed Hatori was up to something interesting. Hatori woke up groggy to find the medicine had been completed. Ariasu informed her of the success. Hatori handed the medicine to the fairy, hoping she would act on her own will. The fairy applied it to Garland's eyes, and indeed, he saw her. Garland had always known about fairy lovers. The fairy said she couldn't leave because of him, but Garland was willing to give his body to her as long as she didn't mind. The fairy replied that she had given him nothing. Garland disagreed, saying that since his wife's death, his life had been routine. But since meeting the fairy in the rose garden, he had regained a thirst for life. Thus the fairy had given him much. The fairy cried, unable to forget Garland, who announced he would go far away, possibly to be with his wife, but he would see the fairy again. If there were still people worth waiting for, the fairy could take his body. Without waiting for a response, he offered himself. The fairy cried inconsolably, and Hatori, who witnessed everything, was also very sad. The fairy told Hatori she planned to stay in the rose garden until the world's end, waiting for Garland's return, and thanked Hatori for her help. Seeing Hatori in tears, Ieyasu knew she was very sad and somewhat anxious. He urged her to go back to sleep. Hatori agreed, but just as she reached her doorstep, Oberon arrived. He stated that creating a medicine to see fairies was prohibited, and he needed to take the remaining substances. Hatori did not resist, but as she was about to hand it over, the ring on her hand suddenly cracked and she collapsed, vomiting blood. Oberon said the ring could no longer restrain her. The knight's beloved child was becoming increasingly frail. Even Ruth spat out some blood, but he was more worried about Hatori's condition. Oberon instructed him to return to Hatori's shadow and pulled the dazed Ieyasu aside to take Hatori away. Given her condition, she couldn't see a human doctor. It seemed they must go to the fairy kingdom. Ieyasu instructed the worried Silky to watch the house while he took Hatori to the fairy kingdom. The fairies disliked the half-hearted Ieyasu, but adored the knight's beloved child, Hatori. However, Ieyasu threatened any fairy that tried to approach her. Oberon told him to relax, as a powerful new doctor had arrived, belonging to a new species. When Hatori woke up, the fairy doctor removed her bandages, and she realized she was in part of the fairy kingdom. The doctor explained that her body couldn't sustain the magic within it, and was now only being suppressed by a magic stone. He mentioned that a human hospital would provide more conventional treatment, hinting that Oberon had intentionally brought Hatori and Ieyasu here. The doctor, named Asha, was suitable for human babies raised by humans, but known as a changeling. Meanwhile, Ieyasu followed Oberon to meet Kui, who, observing his blood, hoped they would stay in the fairy kingdom. Asha was showing Hatori around the hospital, explaining that fairies, like humans or beasts, can become sick and age. She heard that Ieyasu was Hatori's husband and wondered if they recognized each other, given the differences between fairies and humans. Hatori claimed she was a magic teacher. Suddenly, a centaur fairy sprang from the bushes, hugging Asha affectionately. Upon seeing Hatori, he also showed great affection and asked Asha to return home early for dinner. Hatori then learned that the centaur was Asha's husband, also a human raised in the fairy kingdom after being swapped. They had lived in a world not their own for half a century. Humans staying long here transform into non-humans. The human world is toxic to the soul. Even if Ieyasu was unaffected, the longer Hatori stayed, the worse she felt. She was more suited here and needed to abandon her human identity soon or risk death. Asha told Hatori that she initially believed she was human, working normally in a hospital, but people were scared of her until her husband came for her. People feared what was different, but Asha remained guilt-free. Asha then led Hatori to a pool that could heal her wounds. Hatori's blood seeped into the water. Suddenly, Asha revealed she was a fairy, and though attracted to the knight's beloved child, disliked Hatori and pushed her into the pool. Ieyasu declined Kui's offer. Though he didn't understand human thoughts, he wanted to learn. Fairies might lament or mock him elsewhere, but that wasn't what he wanted. Humans feared him, but mostly, it was humans who accepted him. Thus, he hoped Hatori would continue living as a human. Suddenly, Hatori snapped back to reality, pulling Asha into the pool with her. Asha then smiled, acknowledging Hatori's ability. Asha told Hatori that the willpower of living beings can sometimes become the world's strongest force. Thus, the desire to survive is crucial. However, Hatori, even though she bled enough to be fatal, did not feel this urge, which is why her wounds did not heal. But she had just resisted herself. As a doctor, regardless of Hatori's desire to live, Asha had to protect her life. During this struggle, Hatori's wounds healed. Ieyasu was brought over by her husband, who accidentally fell into the pool. Silky stayed at home alone, feeling very lonely. Due to her facial paralysis, she showed no specific expression. To avoid feeling too lonely, Silky began to clean and decorate vigorously, hanging bells at the door, to notice immediately when Hatori entered. She even changed the wallpapers, but never saw Hatori return. Silky reflected on her past. This place was once a ruin. She sat there cloaked with her fairy lover nearby. Other fairies pitied Silky because her family ties were cut. They advised her to leave as no one could hear her voice anymore. Unsure where to go, Silky wandered aimlessly and came to a town. Unable to speak, the fairy kingdom's guard found her. Hearing Silky's wish to stay with everyone, the guard put her on a pony and took her to a household. telling her that this family was faithful and traditional. Even if her family was gone, as long as she lived, hope would not be lost. The guard also told Silky that the light that once illuminated her was gone, and this time, she would guard this light, giving her new clothes. Silky was grateful to the guardian and gave him a kiss. Hatori and others left the fairy kingdom and were surprised to find it was already winter. Ariyasu then remembered he forgot to tell her about the different flow of time between the two places. He disagreed with Hatori walking on the ground. Silky, hearing their return bell, noticed the changes inside the house as soon as Hatori entered. Silky immediately hugged her, and Hatori quickly apologized for being late. Hatori missed the autumn scenery. While outside watching the snow, she met twins claiming to be from Yale. They brought Hatori a garland and asked if she was ready for Yale night. Ariyasu appeared behind Hatori, stating he was preparing. He knew the Yale twins, but was unclear about their origin. Ariyasu was very concerned about Hatori's health and insisted she speak up if feeling unwell. Meanwhile, Ruth felt unworthy as a familiar, feeling helpless when Hatori was in danger. Ariyasu reassured him, stating he knew Hatori better than anyone and could inform him immediately if she hid any discomfort, allowing him to help. Ruth, tearfully, indicated that Hatori was already catching a cold, which she explained was just from coming back inside. Ariyasu took her to prepare for Yale, planning to gather supplies from the forest. On the way, they encountered a goddess patrolling on a reindeer. Ariyasu and Hatori hid behind a tree. They left behind sprouts and dew, which were picked up by the pregnant winter goddess. On their return, Hatori admired the beautiful scenery. That evening, they finally finished decorating the room and hung mistletoe at the door. Ariyasu mentioned that kissing under the mistletoe was allowed. Seeing his expectant look, Hatori asked Ariyasu to kneel down. Unable to kiss him directly, she kissed his forehead instead. Ariyasu moved closer to her face. He mentioned feeling a tingling sensation in his back and spine. Then, Hatori noticed Ruth looking at them expectantly and gave him a kiss too, making Ruth wag his tail happily. That night, Hatori received a note. The next day, when Ariyasu was replying, he discovered Hatori had sneaked out to meet Alice. Alice wanted to buy a Christmas gift for Mikhail and asked if Hatori had any gift plans. Realizing she hadn't thought of it, they decided to go shopping together. Since neither had many friends, they lacked experience in giving gifts. Alice declared that they were partners since they both lived and learned with their respective masters, without any distinction between magic and sorcery, just normal friends. At that moment, a fairy delivering mail recognized Hatori as one of Ariyasu's household. While greeting her, Alice did not see him due to a concealment spell. However, the fairy did not hide from Alice. Startled upon seeing him, Alice listened as the fairy suggested they think of what the other person needed most on a regular basis. Alice and Hatori decided to keep looking around. Hatori thought of a gift. Just as Alice was about to ask her about it, someone Alice knew from before approached. This person pulled out a small paper bag, wanting Alice to join them. Alice stated she no longer used drugs. After persistent harassment, she beat them up. When they pulled out a knife, they saw Ruth snarling fiercely at them. The two quickly fled. Alice apologized for the trouble caused by her former acquaintances. Hatori asked if the drugs tasted good. Alice replied she didn't like them and used them not out of preference, but out of compulsion. Recalling it felt like a dream, Alice revealed that her parents forcefully gave her the drugs, and she had to sell them until Mikhail took her in. She was hiding from a pursuit in a corner when Mikhail discovered her magical talent. He asked if she wanted to stay there, but she shook her head and he took her home. Initially, her master wanted her to take a bath, but her withdrawal symptoms kicked in. During detox, Alice was very wary of Mikhail, as she grew up in a garbage heap and trusting others seemed absurd. But while helping to sort the bookshelf, she found a book without a cover. As she was about to read it, a monster appeared from inside. Mikhail got scratched while protecting her. After scolding her, he reflected on his own mistake for not explaining properly. Alice was concerned about his injuries, but Mikhail reassured her, emphasizing that Alice, having just overcome addiction, must not get hurt again. Alice often gets injured, so she knows how to bandage. She treated Mikhail's wounds and tearfully apologized for the first time, promising to do better next time and to protect Mikhail as his guardian. Mikhail simply patted her shoulder. Alice still feels a bit embarrassed about it now. Hatori didn't know how to react when he heard about it, but Alice said she appreciated just being listened to. She believes her happiness is in her own hands. After buying gifts, They prepared to go home. Before leaving, Alice asked Hatori if a very small bird had ever visited them. Seeing Hatori knew nothing about it, Alice decided not to bring it up again. Ruth was happy that Hatori made a friend. Nearby, 2 children accidentally bumped into Hatori. He didn't mind and sneaked back home, but Ariyasu had already noticed and was waiting at the door. He told her she faced many dangers along the way. Ruth calmed Ariyasu down, reminding him he was also there, which made Ariyasu realize he was actually angry. Hatori gave Ariyasu her Christmas gift, surprising him. Truthfully, Hatori hadn't prepared it initially, but was glad he liked it. It was a bow tie necklace. Ariyasu had also prepared a gift for Hatori, a large handmade teddy bear. Ariyasu had crafted teddy bears every year, inspired by a childhood request from Angelica. This year's was the best yet. Many friends sent Hatori gifts, including Angelica and Lindell, but those would be opened the next day. Despite this, Ariyasu felt Hatori should have included him. Hatori unusually refused because the topic was a secret among girls. She had never experienced such an anticipated Christmas. Meanwhile, Gray Eyes found a child in the forest. The girl hurried home to ask her parents if they had seen Ethan, but they had no idea who that was. When Hatori woke up, she found crystals had grown on the teddy bear, absorbed from her magic. Ruth mentioned that these crystals looked delicious to fairies. The table was filled with gifts for Ariyasu from others. Lindell sent a dragon scale, Selk sent a fish, Simon a watch, and Angelica a bracelet entwined with a magic stone Hatori had received earlier. Wearing it nearly stops the generation and absorption of magic, which is suitable for Hatori's body. Ariyasu reminded her not to experiment or use magic without permission. Hatori felt helpless as she couldn't reciprocate the gifts. She thought about at least doing some work to help Simon. When Ariyasu found out she was going out, he insisted on following, fearing she might sneak off to London again. The village was nearly deserted, only a girl desperately looking for her brother. Her parents were puzzled as they remembered having only one child. Hatori recalled seeing this child at the station. She glanced at Ariyasu in the shadows, and he surprisingly agreed to her plan. This girl is named Stella. She came to her grandmother's house in town with her family for Christmas. This morning, she took her younger brother to the courtyard. However, her brother, who is frail and didn't want to leave, argued with her. In anger, Stella said she wished she didn't have such a brother and ran back home. Although she had wished for her brother to disappear, she panicked when she found that everyone at home had forgotten him. She desperately wanted to find her brother. Ariyasu's shadow climbed onto Hatori's throat and spoke in her voice, asking Stella what she was willing to pay, as seeking their help came with a cost. Stella wasn't sure what she could offer, but she promised to make lots of treats and visit the town monthly with plenty for Hatori. If necessary, she was prepared to work her entire life to repay them, but she had to find her brother. Ariyasu said the treats were enough. Stella, startled by Ariyasu's sudden appearance, realized the dog could talk. Although scared, the fear of not finding her brother was greater. They entered the forest, prepared to use magic to find their way. Hatori gave Stella a flower to hold so Ruth could find her if she got lost. However, Ariyasu noticed something was hindering them. Fortunately, Hatori had a magically crystallized flower, which was popular with the fairies. They traded with the flower to find a path deep into the woods, but soon ran out of flowers. Hatori decided to trade with her blood instead. Stella, unable to see the fairies, was worried as she saw Hatori getting hurt. Hatori explained she also had a brother whom she could no longer see, which is why she wanted Stella to find hers and was looking forward to her treats. Stella felt immensely grateful and guilty. They continued to search deep into the forest where they encountered Gray Eyes. Gray Eyes pointed out that Stella had abandoned her brother first. Since she couldn't remember his name, it meant their fate was severed. Devastated, Stella accepted Gray Eyes' challenge to a game, with Ariyasu also forced into it. Hatori couldn't react in time as Stella lunged for her brother, but it was too late. Gray Eyes declared that if they didn't find him by dusk, they would belong to him. He urged Hatori to use her beast-like sense of smell to search quickly. Stella feared forgetting her brother, and Hatori was also worried. Ruth comforted her, saying everything would be all right as long as they found him, and told Stella that it's natural to cry for a sibling because family bonds aren't easily broken. Remembering Gray Eyes' mention of a beast-like sense of smell, Hatori asked Ruth to lead Stella while she rushed back to find the fox skin. Ruth understood her intent but was worried Hatori might lose control. Hatori assured her she knew where her place was. Meanwhile, Ariasu, locked up, was annoyed. Grey Eyes was a sorcerer who had lived for thousands of years, and his ancient power was formidable. Ethan, Stella's brother, woke up scared of him but calmed down upon hearing Ariasu talk about his sister. Ethan curiously approached Ariasu and started touching his bones. Ariasu reluctantly pushed him away and then transformed into a human. Surprisingly, he looked like a young boy with white hair, resembling a white-haired version of Hatori. Ariasu asked Ethan if he still remembered his sister. Ethan was shocked to find he had no memories of her. Ariasu asked if Ethan had said, "I don't need such an annoying sister." Ethan replied that he had said it in anger. Ariasu mentioned that he didn't understand family relationships and suggested that blood relations might help one understand. However, Ethan argued that blood relation was not everything, and that family should be irreplaceable. He now wanted to apologize to his sister and attend a party with her. Suddenly, Ariasu realized something was wrong. Hatori had transformed into a red bear and was desperately searching for Ariasu. She managed to find him. Ariasu immediately emerged from the water and hugged Hatori. Stella also found her brother Ethan, who grumpily said Stella didn't want him anymore. Stella responded that Ethan was her only brother and she didn't want any other. The siblings reconciled, but still couldn't remember each other's names. Grey Eyes appeared again, enjoying the earnest nature of humans. He told the children that human language was powerful, which is why fairies listen to humans. Initially planning to take their fate, he decided to accept Hatori's crystallized flower as a substitute. He sent the four back to the town. The children's parents had been looking for them all afternoon. Ariasu quickly hid in Hatori's shadow. The parents, curious about Hatori, asked who she was. Stella hugged Hatori, calling her a new friend she made that day, and asked Hatori for her home address to visit her again. After the incident, Stella soon visited Hatori, bringing many treats as promised. Ariasu, not wanting to disturb them, returned to his room. Hatori invited Stella to her room and confessed she hadn't had many friends and was unsure how to interact. Stella suggested doing activities they both enjoyed, and that it was okay to be rejected. She explained that language was meant for exchange, not just understanding. Everyone has things they want or don't want to do. A lesson from her father. Stella and Hatori got along well. Despite being only 10, Stella was mature and thoughtful. When Hatori mentioned she couldn't be honest, Stella said it was okay to act as she wished, as long as she wasn't capricious. Their laughter reached Ariasu's ears, making him feel left out. As soon as Hatori went downstairs, he saw Ariasu turn into a dog and run away. Hatori put on her coat, grabbed the fox skin, and went out to find him, leaving Ruth to send Stella home. Ruth sighed, remarking on their lack of honesty. Hatori almost couldn't catch up with Ariasu. She quickly put on the fox skin, transformed into her desired appearance, and finally spotted Ariasu's tail in a corner. As she approached, everything went dark, and she realized she wasn't outside. Hatori worried she might have disturbed Ariasu, or that he was feeling unwell or upset. Ariasu remained silent for a while, then mentioned he felt like leaving home after hearing their cheerful conversation, and even wanted Stella to go home quickly. He had wanted to be alone but felt better when Hatori caught up, though he still couldn't stop walking. Hatori didn't know why this was happening. Just as she tried to explain, vines tightly wrapped around her. With no other choice, Hatori rubbed Ariasu's face and asked if he wanted to go back for some tea. As the vines loosened and Hatori tried to leave, Ariasu gently bit her shoulder. Hatori was surprised that Ariasu cared more about her than she thought. She wondered if she could be happy about this. Meanwhile, Stella had returned from her grandmother's house, looking forward to seeing Hatori again. She passed by Kadafal's and felt a pain in her neck, but didn't see Grey Eyes' transparent figure next to Kadafal's. Ariasu kept holding Hatori back, threatening to consume her. Hatori couldn't allow this to happen. A hand wearing a gold ring pulled her, and a wand appeared in her hand. Hatori summoned a phoenix. Ruth had not found them yet, and returned home to a scolding by Silky. He rushed out and followed the phoenix into the forest, where he saw the daughter of the winter goddess. Because they had once offered tender shoots and dew to the goddess, she lent the power of fire to Ruth. This helped Ruth locate Ariasu's hiding place and find Hatori. Hatori understood that Ieyasu did not comprehend emotions and knew this emotion represented jealousy. Despite the jealousy, it should not be vented on others. It was an unresolved emotion that could only be eased by compromising with oneself. Ieyasu didn't want to let Hatori go, but she had other methods. She pulled out a dagger and aimed it at her own neck, unsure where it might stab. However, as soon as the tip touched a drop of blood, Ieyasu immediately released her. Ieyasu sincerely apologized, and Hatori forgave him. They agreed to talk more when they got back. Stella had told her a lot, and it would be great if Ieyasu would listen. They talked under the covers until late into the night and invited her to sleep over. Ieyasu then agreed to go home with her. Ruth was speechless. It looked like a mother-son relationship now, whereas it had been father-daughter before. Hatori told Ieyasu stories all night. The next day, she left a note and went out. I went to London specifically to see Angelica but was greeted by her husband, David. Angelica was busy at the moment. David is an ordinary person, just lucky. Recently, their daughter has also been quite temperamental. Hatori didn't mind much, as she had just managed to soothe Ieyasu the other day. She came to see Angelica because something went wrong while soothing Ieyasu that night. Ieyasu seemed unable to sleep, so Hatori sang him a lullaby. Unexpectedly, he fell into a deep sleep. Angelica suggested that the song might have magical powers, possibly a special ability of Hatori. Angelica said she would check her records. Hatori thanked her for the bracelet she received and mentioned she would return the favor next Christmas. Just after Angelica left, Hatori was so tired that she coughed up blood. David urged her to rest and shared his story with Angelica. It turns out Angelica knew him since he was a child. David had pursued Angelica for a long time before she finally agreed. Only after their daughter was born did David understand why Angelica had initially refused him. He feels very fortunate because he didn't know then that he would age and die, and the lifespan of Angelica and their daughter is uncertain. He worried about their potential suffering if his life ended first. David told Hatori she was lucky as Ieyasu could always be with her. He advised Hatori not to overexert herself and to try to live as long as possible. Hatori returned home with the formula Angelica gave her and administered the prepared potion to Ieyasu. Ruth didn't know whether Ieyasu was awakened by the potion or something else. Once Ieyasu woke up, Hatori finally collapsed from exhaustion, and Ruth had to explain everything. Meanwhile, in the Dragon Kingdom, 2 young dragons wandered outside and were caught in a trap. Lindell thought it was poachers, but it turned out to be cataphels behind it. Although Lindell killed the poachers, the young dragons were still taken away. The captured young dragon was terrified. Meanwhile, Adolf, an acquaintance of Mikhail, was investigating Hatori. Hatori had been declared dead before being auctioned. During a conversation, Adolf noticed Mikhail drinking. Suddenly, their friend Tali burst in, knowing who had injured Mikhail's arm. He was eager to meet this centuries-spanning illusionist, a legendary immortal. Tali had just poured Mikhail a drink when he noticed Mikhail starting to cry, lamenting his own lack of excellence, which he believed led to threats from the Cadaffles. Tali, hearing Mikhail might cry for hours, wanted to leave, but then Selka delivered a letter, revealing Adolf as Lindell's apprentice. At the same time, Hatori had a dream involving Cadaffels, whose mental state seemed unstable, shifting from vulnerable to manic, claiming he wasn't Cadaffels but Joseph. He was bleeding from eyes that had been gouged out, desperately screaming for salvation. Hatori awoke from the nightmare trembling and clung to Ruth. After sleeping for 2 days, she turned to find Selka, and surprisingly, Alice there, who had dressed her. Relieved to learn Alice was 18, Hatori felt more at ease. Upon descending the stairs, she found 2 strangers in her home, with Mikhail also present. When Tali first saw the knight's beloved child, he rushed over excitedly and was beaten up by Alice. Ieyasu appeared very nervous. Mikhail mentioned they were from the academy, a topic Ieyasu seemed reluctant to discuss. They then talked about the young dragons stolen from the Dragon Kingdom, suspecting Cadaffels behind it, since the transfer device left at the scene was made by Mikhail, whose method was stolen when his arm was taken. Ieyasu, knowing his relationship with Lindell, was asked to help find the young dragons because of Lindell's connection to the academy. Recognizing Hatori's desire to help, Ieyasu was initially opposed due to her frailty and their lack of involvement. However, Hatori couldn't ignore the situation, remembering how Lindell had helped Ieyasu through his pain. Mikhail and his companions eagerly listened. Hatori explained that the children had not left the Dragon Kingdom willingly. Having lived there and knowing them well, she couldn't ignore their plight. Ultimately, Ieyasu agreed, surprising Mikhail with his change. Adolf noted Lindell was still investigating the young dragons, and Catafel's whereabouts were unknown. Hatori, having dreamed of him, suspected he might be in London. Tali's information about the rarity of the young dragons gave Hatori an idea. Soon after, Hatori contacted an auctioneer. Cloaked, they arrived at the auction, where the auctioneer warned Ieyasu against using magic or spells. Ieyasu clarified he hadn't used any, just thoroughly restructured his body. Hatori noticed his white hair and red eyes, unlike her own or Simon's, wondering whose image it actually was. The auctioneer didn't ask for everyone's names. Hatori took out a crystal flower transformed by her magic, intending to auction it. The auctioneer agreed, scheduling it for the afternoon and informing them that the dragon auction was at 6 p.m. He also handed Hatori a sum of money, her earnings from a previous auction, and mentioned the dragons were very valuable. If the Academy's funds were insufficient, they could use this money. Ieyasu realized this money was technically his. The auctioneer noted that Hatori had changed somewhat, but people's core parts are hard to change. Despite good or bad, Hatori is definitely stubborn. Tali asked Hatori if she wanted to join their academy. Hatori shook her head, explaining that someone at home would feel lonely if she left. Mikhail asked Ieyasu if he was preventing Hatori from attending the academy. Ieyasu shook his head, stating Hatori wouldn't go, so he never mentioned the academy to her. Mikhail was not concerned about the knight's beloved child, but about Hatori's future as a human. He worried about her growth if Ieyasu was her only dependency. Ieyasu responded that they had no right to speak in such a manner because the academy to Hatori was like a forced knowledge vault that might continue to pass down. Ieyasu asked if Mikhail was also forced to become an illusionist. Mikhail grabbed his collar, telling him not to casually discuss his path. Ieyasu said that Hatori belonged to himself, and she was looking forward to it too. Mikhail stated his wishes might not come true. Alice said Ieyasu didn't understand that even if you pave a way for someone, many choose a different path. Alice was different. She chose her own path. The auction began, and the Academy's budget was 1.5 million. The auctioneer was helping them negotiate. Hatori and her group were observing the surroundings when Hatori heard a strange woman's voice offering help. They communicated while the auction price rose to 2.6 million. The young dragons in the cage were in immense pain and finally broke down during the bidding. Hatori saw black ooze and a giant black bird emerge from the cage, causing everyone to notice her tearful face. Hatori said the young dragons were scared and wanted to go home. Ieyasu realized she could sense the dragon's feelings and hugged her, urging her not to get too involved. At that moment, the mutated dragon spat flames at them. The city above the auction felt the ground shake. Angelica's familiar sensed trouble. Ieyasu shielded Hatori, saying the dragon had probably reverted to an ancestral state. Hatori asked Ieyasu if the child could return, sensing its desire to come back and wanting Ieyasu to teach her how. Ieyasu realized that Hatori's acts of willfulness were not for herself, but this time they were indeed there to help the young dragons. Now their first task is to touch the rampaging dragon and absorb the magic within its body. When Hatori reaches her limit in absorbing magic, Ieyasu will take over this burden. Alice and the others will distract the dragon. Ieyasu teleports with Hatori onto the dragon's back, but the dragon attempts to break free. Left with no choice, Selkie quickly disguises it. The dragon, flapping its wings, charges out. Ieyasu shatters the ceiling above to prevent debris from hitting Hatori. Both are pulled into the sky by the dragon, and Hatori almost falls, but Ruth catches her. However, the dragon turns back and spits fire at Ieyasu. Ruth dives down to save him. Through telepathy, Hatori learns that Ieyasu is burned. She resolutely removes her bracelet and tells Ruth not to come over, but to catch her instead. Hatori, having discarded her bracelet, desperately absorbs magic. Both she and the dragon fall into the water. Ruth dives in and finds her. Ieyasu, despite his injuries, rushes to the riverbank with others and finds Ruth pulling up both the intertwined dragon and Hatori, whose arm has transformed into a monstrous form. When Hatori wakes up again, she sees Dr. Sia and discovers her left arm has turned into a crystalline black. Angelica and Ieyasu rush in. Angelica hugs Hatori first, but then slaps her. stating she would even hit her own daughter. Angelica feels that Hatori always tries to solve everything alone. Ariyasu used to say the same. Hatori quickly inquires about the young dragon and others. The young dragon is still sleeping. Everyone else has returned. She asks Ariyasu if he is hurt, but he tells her that her condition is more serious. She is unaware of her own state, but Lindell explains via a magic mirror that Hatori is now cursed with dragon's blood, which will gradually consume her body and life. This curse is beyond a human's resistance and will eventually rupture her body. When Hatori asks how long she can last, Lindell is unsure. Hatori says she has always lived with two curses, the knight's beloved child and her mother's curse. Adding another doesn't matter to her. Ariyasu's pupils contract and he suddenly leaves the room. While others are still processing, Hatori knows he is angry. Lindell feels guilty. Had it not been for his request, Hatori wouldn't be in this situation. Hatori sees this as proof that she can finally consider others. There is a way to treat her by allowing Hatori to live in the fairy world, but she would cease to be human. Hatori says she will consider it. Her resolve is firm, and she won't waver over this matter. Unable to sleep, Hatori looks for Ariyasu, but he's not there. She dons a cloak and walks around town, meeting townspeople and a fairy lover who gives her a blessing kiss. Ruth worries about her condition, but Hatori enjoys the fresh air outside. She almost falls due to the wind, but Ariyasu appears and supports her, having been by her side from the start. After a long talk, Ariyasu mentioned that although Hatori harbored suicidal thoughts, she always reached out to him. She drew close to him but sacrificed herself for others, which worried Ariyasu about their future together. Despite foreseeing such situations, he couldn't stop Hatori. Hatori acknowledged her past desire to die but mentioned that many helped her realize she could aid others. She learned not to wait for others to allow her to stay, but to actively choose to stay herself. Ariyasu argued she earned her place through self-sacrifice and self-destruction. Hatori admitted her confusion about her own thoughts, feeling she did what she could at the moment without deceiving Ariyasu. Humans often do not understand their own actions, which surprised Ariyasu. Hatori confessed she wasn't smart and sometimes acted before thinking. She asked Ariyasu if he would join her in finding a way forward. Back home, they met a witch named Mariel, who had dealt with Hatori at an auction. Mariel, who had provided funds for Hatori to procure dragon blood, found it unlikely now. Despite this, she examined Hatori's cursed hand and offered her a place in their witches' assembly to help break the curse. Hatori stopped Ariyasu to ask about joining the assembly. Mariel suggested she visit it first and left a letter for Hatori to open once she decided. Mariel left just as Stella arrived to visit. After greetings, Mariel frowned upon seeing the young Stella, wondering who would harm such a child. Stella came with a birthday invitation and learned it was Hatori's birthday today. Surprised, she questioned why they hadn't thrown a party for Hatori. Silky was deeply affected, so Stella suggested Hatori decide how to celebrate next year. Suddenly feeling a tickle in her throat, Hatori coughed up blood but didn't express her thoughts as Stella tactfully left. Ariyasu embraced Hatori, urging her to join the witches' assembly after Mariel told him Hatori might not survive until spring. He prioritized lifting the curse over planning next year's party, unaware that Stella was eavesdropping outside. Unbeknownst to them, it was actually Kadafals who was eavesdropping, feeling that he, who couldn't die, was well matched with the doomed Hatori. Ariyasu has lived in this world for a long time. He has met some people and been disliked by fairies, but Hatori has always watched over him. Since Hatori was cursed, Adolf has been tirelessly seeking a solution, so exhausted that he can barely stand straight. Lindell chats with Selkie as he cannot leave the Dragon Kingdom unless a new guardian is found or the dragons perish. Although Adolf claims he doesn't want to leave, he feels guilty, thinking his failure to become a sorcerer has left him unable to help. Overwhelmed with fatigue, he speaks his mind, and Lindell pats his head. Elsewhere, Hatori and Ariyasu decide to attend the witches' assembly. They fall into a dream where many witches await them. The woman merging with the great tree in the center, Liesel, is the main priestess of the assembly. She tells Hatori that there are almost no known ways to keep the dragons alive and break the curse. Mariel looks nervous, but the priestess says they cannot help Hatori, and it's impossible to seek help from others. She admits Mariel wants to use Hatori's dragon power to save herself from a curse. As Hatori is about to speak, the priestess tells her to focus on saving herself before others. The tree represents the lives the priestess has saved. With no solution to break the curse, Ariasu and Hatori leave. Mariel suddenly whispers something to Ariasu, glancing guiltily at Hatori, hinting at a difficult choice. After leaving the assembly, Hatori decides to look for another way, but Ariasu remembers Mariel's words. Only life can replace life. That night, Ariasu asks Ruth if he would always choose Hatori, regardless of what happens. They make a pact, overheard by Hatori. Ariasu leaves the room to find Ariel, trades his nose and wind with magic, and makes a deal with the Academy's Tali for information. The next day when Simon visits, it seems Ariasu has found a new purpose. Meanwhile, Hatori has just put a dragon to sleep when she sees the wind spirit Ariel. Ariel is saddened by her condition but notices her more optimistic attitude. Hatori confirms with Ariel that it favors the knight's beloved child. Now, unaware of what Ariasu and Ruth are planning, she needs a being that will listen to her no matter what. Although Ariel prefers the knight's beloved child, it doesn't hinder its fondness for Hatori. Ruth noticed something was off with Ariasu, but Ariasu insisted that this was the only way to keep Hatori. When Hatori found that Ariasu had brought Stella back and was about to ask what happened, Ariasu cast a sleeping spell on her. Even Ruth sided with him. As Hatori was about to give up, the old dragon appeared, encouraging her to forge ahead. Hatori feared seeing something she didn't want to, suspecting something but not daring to believe it. The old dragon told her to just do what she felt was right without guilt. Hatori was thankful for the guidance, but the dragon revealed that it wasn't guiding her. It was merely an image in her mind. The real guide was herself. Resolved, Hatori stabbed her thigh with a stone, never expecting things to just improve after waking up. Silky sadly embraced her, but Hatori had made up her mind. As soon as Ariasu set up the formation, Stella woke up. But it was Catafels mocking Ariasu for being a monster and persecuting Stella for his own desires. Hatori had already broken through the door. The disguised Stella rushed into Hatori's arms, claiming Ariasu planned to use her as Hatori's decoy. Before Ariasu could clarify that it was Catafels inside Stella, Hatori asked if what Stella said was true. Ariasu's silence confirmed it for her. She told Stella to leave and forbade Ruth from following. Ariasu apologized, admitting he had indeed considered it. Hatori reminded him that she had offered to find a solution together, but Ariasu said he never agreed to that. He chose Stella because Hatori showed different emotions towards her, which displeased him. All he wanted was for Hatori to live. Shocked, Hatori punched Ariasu, reddening her own hand in pain. Ariel blocked Ariasu's path, calling him a fool. Hatori caught up with Stella to apologize and discovered Catafels inside her. Exposed, Catafels proposed a deal to provide a spell to avoid death and return the child to her. If she refused, Stella's life was at risk. Ariasu and Ruth arrived as Hatori removed the magic stone, saying she couldn't stay with the current Ariasu and left with Catafels. Upon waking, Hatori confirmed Stella was safe and found a captive young dragon. She realized Catafels had no memory of his dreams and saw his severed hand. Catafels shared that he, like her, was under a severe curse. His was the inability to live as a human. Hers was to face death. He proposed to take the curse of death from her, offering part of his body in exchange, granting Hatori an immortal body. Hatori didn't trust him, but she had no choice. Catafels mentioned they needed to conduct an antigen test first. He gouged out his own eye and comforted Hatori that she wouldn't change her appearance. Despite this, Hatori resolved that even if her appearance changed, it wouldn't matter. Suddenly, Catafels found himself disgusted with her and personally gouged out her other eye. After the transplant, he said that Hatori's eyes made the world look bright and that they were now the only beings who could see the world the same way. He advised Hatori to rest while using the residual memories in her eyes. Upon waking, Hatori found herself back in her old house, the home before her father and brother left. Her brother had just been born and possessed the same ability as her father to dispel monsters. Her mother was very kind to her. Recently, her father had been coming home later and later due to more night shifts. Her mother, sharing the same physical condition as Hatori, couldn't work, but the family was happy during this period. One evening, Hatori discovered these were her residual memories. Catafels deliberately awakened these memories to torment her, but she also discovered a part of the power left in Catafels' eyes. Kadafels had absorbed and merged so much that he had forgotten parts of himself. This power revealed to Hatori that her arm was both cursing and protecting her, and she couldn't touch herself until she'd made up her mind. That night, her crying brother woke up. Her father got up to soothe him, saw a fairy outside the window, frowned, packed his clothes and luggage, and left in the night with his brother. Hatori saw this, but thought he was just going out for a while. However, he never returned. Her memory ended there, so she couldn't follow him. Her mother also noticed the father's departure. From that day, her mother started working while caring for Hatori, but was frequently threatened by impurities due to their similar condition. Although her mother had told Hatori not to fear those beings, she began to fear them herself. She told herself not to be afraid, her sole obsession being to protect Hatori. One day, when she saw a fairy biting Hatori's arm, she crazily chopped off the fairy's tail. Afterwards, she heard fairies discussing how her husband had left because he couldn't stand them, calling them pitiful yet tempting. Her mother desperately took Hatori home, attempting to find a new house. However, under the dual pressures of work and non-human threats, she was going mad. A voice told her that her daughter was a burden. She felt as if she had gone crazy, wishing she had never had her. She almost strangled Hatori, leaving behind the words, "If only I hadn't had you." Hatori was barely alive and didn't notice her mother crying. When Hatori finally mustered the last of her strength to call out to her mother snapped out of it, realizing she was supposed to protect her daughter, not become her biggest threat. Then her mother went to the window, showed Hatori a relieved smile, apologized, and hoped for her forgiveness before jumping out of the window without looking back. Hatori collapsed to the ground, remarking how cruel Kadafel's torment was. Her frantic mother again choked Hatori, wishing she had never been born. Hatori responded that the mother before her was just a figment of her imagination, because if her mother truly hated her, she would have killed her instead of letting go. Hatori was grateful to have met many people. Otherwise, she would have died before seeing her mother again. Her mother suddenly knelt down, wept, and apologized. Hatori said her mother had tried very hard and done a lot for her, but unfortunately, she had not succeeded. The old dragon had told Hatori that she was free. Hatori said she could not forgive her mother. She used to love her mother and had many fond memories, but she could not recall them after that day. However, thanks to her mother, she had met someone she liked. She thought he was reliable, but sometimes he was a headache. She couldn't forgive her mother, but she was grateful that her mother had let go of her neck. Although she could not forget her mother, she would move beyond the shadows her mother left behind and continue on her journey. Once her mother's shadow disappeared, Hatori looked towards Kadafels, who reappeared and said he was the undying curse and blessing of Kadafel's body. If Hatori chose to live, she would accept him, and he could become a blessing to her, with the dragon blood forever gnawing and protecting her. Hatori asked him what his wish was, since he had only given her blessings. Kadafels thought for a moment and said he had one wish and asked if Hatori could help him realize it. At that moment, Kadafels noticed that Hatori's rejection reaction was almost over and was about to attack him, but Hatori choked him, ready to retaliate. She heard the desires of Kadafel's body in her dream. Although he was always calling for help, he was still harming others. So she needed to figure out what Kadafels really wanted. After Hatori left, Ariasu went on a rampage in the fairy territory and was subdued by the guardians. The fairy Kui saw this as an opportunity to trick Ariasu into returning to the fairy kingdom. Ariasu couldn't understand why Hatori had left him, as he had always said he would never leave as long as he didn't let go. Kui said that although Ariasu claimed to be a sorcerer, his way of loving was similar to theirs, the fairies. She and Oberon promised to help Ariasu find Hatori, but only if they stayed here. Ariasu countered, saying Kui thought like him, but Hatori thought differently. He wanted to continue living with Hatori and wanted Hatori to pet his head, so he had to change. However, both he and Ruth couldn't contact Hatori. Kui summoned branches, aware that Ariasu did not want pity or sympathy. However, both Ariasu and Hatori were dear to her. Thus, Kui decided to lend him a hand. Together, they spread intertwining thorns, and nearly everyone associated with the demon realm sensed this power. Even Alice felt a chill as ghostly flames she had seen in the cemetery before emerged at her feet. Mariel had just returned home when the priestess arrived. The priestess realized that Mariel might have violated the rules. They must not harm humans, and research on harmful curses was meant to prevent hurting humans. Mariel thought the priestess was too kind. She wished the priestess would prioritize herself. Embracing her, the priestess said she wasn't alone in her loneliness. If Mariel was responsible for these events, she had to rectify her mistakes. With no choice, Mariel grabbed her coat and rushed out. Meanwhile, Kui and Ariasu were heading towards Hatori's location. Through that eye, Hatori saw Kadafal's past, or more accurately, Joseph's memories. He was a gravedigger's son, shunned and despised by the village for being unclean. One day, he heard cries for help from the forest. It was Kadafal's. Joseph dug him out of the mud and brought him home. Kadafal's was the only one who had ever asked for his help. Joseph was happy and kept trying to save him, even if the village shunned him. Initially, things were fine, but over time, he became more paranoid while the villagers enjoyed bullying him. Joseph thought, once Kadafal's recovered, they could leave the village and live happily together. So, his desire to save Kadafal's grew stronger. No matter what experiments he conducted, Kadafal's neither recovered nor continued to wither. Since Kadafal's was the only one who had asked for his help, Joseph felt he must save him to pursue a happy life. During a rampage, he went mad, thinking Kadafal's would not die. He decided to merge with Kadafal's and seek happiness together. Afterward, Joseph became half alive, half dead. A kind-hearted girl who felt pity for him saved him, only to have her legs chopped off and stitched together. Joseph also consulted other illusionists about his curse. The illusionists, having never seen anything like it, asked who had cursed him. But even Kadafal's couldn't remember. His memory had started to disintegrate, and in pain, he sought to attach other bodies to his own. One day, while in a tavern, he overheard people talking about him being cursed for throwing stones at a child of the gods. Joseph researched this and was shocked that such a trivial act had cursed him. They just wanted to live simply. How long must this pain continue? He wished someone would save him. Kadafal's realized his memories were being viewed, became furious, and overturned Hatori, attempting to tear off her arm. Fortunately, Kui arrived with Ariasu just in time. Kadafal's was thrown aside. Kui was about to leave with Hatori when Kadafal's released the surrounding chimeras. Luckily, Alice and Mikhail also arrived. Alice immediately noticed something was wrong with Hatori's eyes. Kadafal said that this was the closest he had come to death in thousands of years. He questioned why they must suffer because of such a curse and expressed a desire to leave. Hatori's eye still echoed with his cries of pain. When will this suffering end? All because of a sin I can't even remember? The number of spirits increased. Hatori declined Kui's offer and rushed towards where Kadafal's had disappeared, passing by Ariasu without a word. Mikhail decided to stay and clean up, urging Ariasu to follow quickly, unless he wanted to see Hatori die in an unknown place. Meanwhile, the ghostly flames decided to form a pact with Alice because she smelled of fire. Hatori chased after Kadafal's and found Mariel worried about her curse. Hearing that Hatori was pursuing Kadafal's, Mariel transformed into a bull and carried her for a while. Kadafal's was surprised that Hatori could catch up. Kadafal's told Hatori that she didn't understand the pain of suffering. He mentioned that Hatori, being favored, never had to worry about life and death and received education easily. The only trouble was her parent. But the one who acted in pain was only Hatori. Hatori admitted she had envied and cursed many things and was willing to do anything to escape pain, saying she was similar to Kadafal's. Therefore, she wanted to beat him up severely here. Hatori never felt her choices were right. Just as she was about to act, Gray Eyes appeared, enjoying watching twisted emotions, and thus chose to help Kadafal's. Kadafal's summoned a swarm of centipedes to attack Hatori. Iriasu finally arrived on time. As Gray Eyes was about to act, Ariel also showed up, complicating things for Gray Eyes. Kadafal's decided not to continue the fight, but Iriasu had already targeted Gray Eyes. He and Ariel executed a combo attack, successfully killing the clone of Gray Eyes that was about to escape with Kadafal's. Hatori grabbed the exhausted Kadafal's, telling him he might suffer more than anyone she knew. But that didn't justify letting others bear his pain or act as he pleased. Kadafal's argued that Hatori was doing the same by sacrificing what she wanted, no different from his desires. Ruth grabbed Kadafal's by the ankle, allowing Hatori to suppress him again. Hatori said there was a difference and was prepared to end it all. She intended to use a sleeping spell, but was impaled by Kadafal's. However, She did not retreat. Instead, she seized the opportunity to hold him tightly. Ruth reached in and removed the eye Kadaffles had stolen, then stepped out of the circle. This was an agreement Ruth had made with Hatori on her way there, and this time, Ruth kept the promise. Kadaffles could not escape Hatori's embrace. Hatori told him that his pain was from no one understanding his feelings, so she softly began singing a lullaby. Kadaffles actually wanted death, but the curse of immortality was inescapable. All Hatori could offer was a long sleep. After finishing the song, Hatori collapsed from exhaustion. Mikhail was shocked, and Ieyasu did not stop Hatori's self-destruction, explaining it was an agreement between them. In her dream, Hatori heard the voice of the immortal blessing. She negotiated with the curse of dragon blood, which agreed to keep Hatori alive, while the dragon would one day end her life. They maintained a delicate balance inside Hatori, so she wouldn't have immediate problems, making her no different from ordinary beings. The blessing told Hatori she could return to that person. Her eyes also returned to normal. Although she received the blessing of the immortal curse, her body showed no mutations. When Hatori woke up, Ieyasu was by her side. The two began a lighthearted argument based on past conflicts. Silky immediately rushed over to hug Hatori, and nearby Ruth couldn't escape being scolded. Days later, based on the argument, a contract was set that Hatori must follow certain rules when going out. Avoid danger, leave if injured, and consult before acting. Everything seemed to return to normal. Kadaffles was hidden deep in a forest tower, with Ieyasu guessing he wouldn't wake for decades. Hatori even brought water for Kadaffles. Grey Eyes asked if Kadaffles didn't plan to wake up, to which he replied he no longer wanted to be bothered by strange people. Wandering in a painful world, he had found his resting place. Unable to be killed, he might as well sleep. Later, Hatori visited Angelica, whose injuries had almost healed, but she still couldn't exert herself. Hatori received a custom-made item from Angelica, blushing profusely. Angelica also gave her an extra gift. Then Hatori attended Stella's birthday party, which Stella declared was also a party for the two of them, compensating for not celebrating Hatori's birthday previously. They exchanged gifts. Hatori gave her crystallized flower, and Stella gave her something specially commissioned by her aunt. Silky received a message from Ariel, and quickly got a set of clothes for Ieyasu, then asked him to meet in the forest. At that moment, Hatori, wearing a veil and sitting on a rock, was dressed in a pure white long dress that looked like a wedding gown. The fairies prompted a gust of wind. Ieyasu suddenly clenched the clothes, asking if this was the beauty Hatori spoke of, his heart skipping a beat. Hatori took out matching rings and personally put one on Ieyasu. She had the rings custom made so that if anything happened to one, the other would know, hoping to provide some peace of mind. Ieyasu then mentioned that a ring worn on the left ring finger symbolized marriage. Hatori sighed, saying although they had met only last year, she had met many people because of Ieyasu and had moved beyond her own mental barriers. She was now glad she hadn't jumped back then, attributing these thoughts not only to Ieyasu but admitting she wouldn't have had them without him. Ieyasu also said he would no longer do things to upset Hatori, but he might lose control and turn into a monster over matters concerning Hatori. He asked if Hatori would accept him like this. Hatori replied that Stella once said, "Conversation is not for understanding each other but for exchanging thoughts. If there are conflicts or misunderstandings, they should discuss them together and find an acceptable solution." Hatori then asked Ieyasu if she could continue to accompany him. Ieyasu responded by lifting Hatori in an embrace, saying, "Of course you are my bride."